There's something buried deep in the human spirit, a longing to reach beyond the ordinary, to touch the divine. Since the dawn of time, civilizations have looked to the heavens, the earth, and the unseen forces between, weaving stories of gods and destinies that shaped their worlds. These aren't just tales, they're echoes of our deepest questions. Who are we? Why are we here? And is there something greater guiding our steps? Today, we're embarking on a journey through 50 of the most captivating myths of divine destiny stories that have stirred hearts, toppled empires, and whispered secrets across millennia. Picture this, a Babylonian priest chanting under the stars, deciphering the will of the gods in the movement of planets. A Greek oracle, trembling with sacred fury, delivering prophecies that would decide the fate of kings. A Maya scribe inscribing the destiny of the world into stone, believing every event was written in the cosmic code. These aren't just fragments of the past, they're windows into how humanity has grappled with the unknown, how we've tried to make sense of the forces that seem to pull the strings of fate. And the astonishing thing, these myths don't just belong to history. They linger in our dreams, our fears, even our modern stories, hidden threads connecting us to something timeless. So why do these ancient stories still grip us? Because they're more than legends. They're mirrors. In every culture, in every era, people have sought answers in the divine, sometimes with awe, sometimes with defiance, but always with that unshakable curiosity. And that's what we're uncovering today. From the celestial battles of Norse gods to the whispered destinies of Egyptian pharaohs, each myth is a piece of a grand puzzle, one that reveals how humanity has always reached for the stars, even when the answers seem just out of grasp. This isn't just a collection of tales, it's an exploration of the very fabric of belief. So settle in. The journey begins now. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, shrouded in the scent of bay leaves and burning laurel, sat the most powerful woman in ancient Greece, though she never ruled an empire or led an army. The Oracle of Delphi spoke with the voice of Apollo himself, her cryptic whispers steering the course of nations. Kings and commoners alike climbed the sacred way, bearing lavish gifts, desperate for a glimpse of destiny. But this wasn't just some charlatan's act. When the Pythia inhaled those strange vapors rising from the earth, a mist later theorized to be ethylene gas seeping through the temples, fissures, her convulsions and babbling weren't theater. Those who witnessed her described a transformation, a woman suddenly speaking in a man's voice, her words tumbling out in riddles that priests would scramble to interpret. Take Croesus, the obscenely wealthy king of Lydia, who famously asked if he should wage war against Persia. The oracle's reply, "If you cross the river Halys, a great empire will fall." Blinded by confidence, he assumed it meant his enemy's demise, only to watch his own kingdom crumble. Then there's the chilling prophecy given to Oedipus' father. His newborn son would one day kill him and marry his mother. Every desperate attempt to avoid this fate only wove the threads tighter. These weren't just clever word games, they reveal something profound about how the Greeks viewed destiny, not as a fixed path, but as a current you could struggle against, yet never truly escape. What's most fascinating isn't just the prophecies themselves, but how the temple became the crossroads of the ancient world. Before any major decision, colonizing new lands, rewriting laws, even starting wars, city-states would send envoys to Delphi, treating the oracle's words as divine GPS. And here's the twist. Modern excavations found that the temple sat directly atop two intersecting fault lines, the very cracks that likely released those mind-altering gases. So was the Pythia truly channeling the gods, or simply high on geological fumes? Maybe both, because in the end, it didn't matter whether the power came from below the earth or beyond the stars. What mattered was that for centuries, an entire civilization believed down to their bones that destiny could be glimpsed in the trembling words of a woman breathing the breath of the earth itself. But the Oracle of Delphi wasn't infallible, far from it. For every prophecy that struck like lightning, there were whispers of failure, manipulation, and the slow unraveling of the temple's divine reputation. Take the Athenian envoys who, during the Persian Wars, begged for guidance as Xerxes' armies closed in. The oracle's initial response was apocalyptic: "Fly to the ends of the earth, for all will be destroyed." Only after desperate bribes and pleading did the priests offer a second, more favorable reading, one that hinted at wooden walls saving the city. The Athenians interpreted this as their navy, a gamble that paid off at the Battle of Salamis. But was this divine insight or political maneuvering? The temple's wealth depended on patronage, and the line between prophecy and pragmatism blurred often. Then there's the scandal of the sacred silver. In the 4th century BCE, a Thessalian politician named Philomelus seized control of Delphi and melted down sacred offerings to fund mercenaries, sparking the Third Sacred War. The oracle's silence during this crisis spoke volumes. If the gods truly spoke through the Pythia, why didn't they warn of this sacrilege? Even Alexander the Great, who famously received a prophecy calling him invincible, reportedly dragged the Pythia by the hair when she initially refused to cooperate. The message was clear: Delphi's power relied as much on human loyalty as divine favor. Modern archaeology paints an even more complex picture. Excavations revealed something astonishing. The temple's famed omphalos, the stone marking Delphi as the center of the world, wasn't original. It was a Roman-era replica planted after the original vanished, and those prophetic fissures in the earth, they dried up centuries before the oracle's final prophecies, leaving later priests to stage the rituals. By the time Emperor Theodosius shut Delphi down in the 4th century CE, the once great temple was a shadow of itself, its prophecies reduced to hollow echoes. Yet here's the twist: Delphi's decline doesn't diminish its legacy. It reveals something raw about humanity. We crave certainty even when it's draped in riddles. And perhaps that's why, long after the last priest left the ruins, travelers still come to Delphi. Not for answers, but for the echo of that ancient longing, the same one that sends us staring at the stars, begging the universe to whisper back. Far to the north, where icy winds howled through the halls of Asgard, destiny wasn't whispered, it was carved. The Vikings didn't consult oracles. They believed fate was woven into the very roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil, by 3 shadowy figures known as the Norns. Unlike the chaotic prophecies of Delphi, these sisters Urtha, Verdandi, and Skuld represented something far more relentless: the past, the present, and the future interlocked like an unbreakable chain. Picture them hunched over the well of Urtha, their fingers etching runes into the trunk of the great tree, their work dictating the lives of gods and mortals alike. No amount of prayer or sacrifice could sway them. Even Odin, the All-Father, who sacrificed an eye for wisdom and hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 nights to learn the secrets of the runes, couldn't alter what they inscribed. This wasn't just mythology, it was a reflection of the Viking worldview. Life was harsh, unpredictable, and often short. The Norns embodied the brutal truth that some things were simply beyond mortal control. Take the legend of Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle where even the gods would perish. The Vikings didn't just predict this event, they knew it was inevitable, foretold in the Norns' carvings. When the great wolf Fenrir broke free and the serpent Jörmungandr rose from the sea, it wasn't chaos, it was destiny unfolding exactly as written. The eerie parallel to the Greek fates is impossible to ignore. Like the Norns, the Moirai Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos spun, measured, and cut the threads of life. But here's the key difference. Where the Greeks sometimes hinted that fate could be twisted or delayed, the Norse left no room for hope. Ragnarök wasn't a warning, it was a countdown. Yet within this grim certainty, the Vikings found a strange kind of freedom. If your doom was already carved into Yggdrasil, why fear it? Their sagas are filled with heroes like Sigurd and Brynhildr, who charged toward their fates with laughter on their lips. Even the gods prepared for Ragnarök by training warriors in Valhalla, not to prevent the end, but to meet it with axes raised. That's the paradox of the Norns. Their unyielding power didn't crush the Viking spirit, it forged it. To live knowing death was certain wasn't a curse. It was a challenge to live boldly, to make your name one the Norns couldn't ignore. Modern discoveries only deepen the mystery. Runestones across Scandinavia bear inscriptions like "Fate goes ever as it must," while archaeological finds reveal amulets carved with runic spells, not to change destiny but to understand it. Even the layout of Viking longhouses, with their central hearth symbolizing Yggdrasil, suggests how deeply this belief seeped into everyday life. Today, as we grapple with our own existential questions, climate change, pandemics, the march of time, the Norns' lesson lingers. Maybe there's power in accepting that some forces are beyond us, not as surrender, but as a call to meet the inevitable with courage. After all, if even the gods must face their twilight, why should mortals expect anything less? From the weathered runestones of Scandinavia to the glowing screens of Hollywood, the Norns haven't faded into obscurity, they've shape-shifted. Marvel's Thor films introduce them as towering, spectral figures who guard the river of time, their dialogue dripping with ominous certainty. "You cannot stop what is to come," they warn Odin, echoing the ancient Norse belief in unchangeable fate. But here's the twist: the movies simplify their role, reducing them to prophetic plot devices rather than the active weavers of destiny from the sagas. Compare that to Tolkien's Middle-earth, where the idea of an unalterable music of creation mirrors the Norns' influence. The Valar, his godlike beings, can no more rewrite fate than Odin could. Tolkien, a scholar of Norse myths, wove their bleak beauty into his legendarium, especially in the doom-laden prophecies surrounding characters like Turin Turambar, whose tragic arc feels ripped straight from a Viking saga. Then there's God of War, where the Norns appear as a trio of grotesque, all-knowing beings. The game cleverly subverts expectations. Instead of mystical seers, they're portrayed as analysts who piece together fate through observation and logic, a nod to our modern obsession with data predicting outcomes. Yet their core function remains eerily accurate. When Kratos and Atreus confront them, the Norns sneer, "You don't change, you're predictable." It's a brutal echo of the Old Norse mindset. Destiny isn't magic, it's pattern. But pop culture doesn't always get it right. Many adaptations strip away the Norns' cosmic gravitas, turning them into generic fortune-tellers or omniscient narrators. The video game Assassin's Creed Valhalla reduces them to mere quest-givers, their dialogue lacking the gut-punch fatalism of the myths. Even Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology, while brilliantly accessible, softens their edges to suit modern tastes. What's lost in these retellings is the raw terror of the original belief that every breath you take was already carved into the world tree long before you drew it. Yet some creators dive deeper. The TV series The Northman captures the Norns' essence without naming them, weaving scenes where characters stare into the night sky, resigned to their preordained violence. And indie comics like Ragnarok by Walter Simonson restore their primal dread, depicting them as gnarled, relentless architects of collapse. The Norns endure because they tap into a universal anxiety. Are we truly free, or just following a script written in stars we'll never see? Whether as Marvel's ghostly arbiters or God of War's cynical strategists, they force us to confront the same question the Vikings did: not how to escape fate, but how to face it without flinching. In the celestial courts of Chinese mythology, where jade palaces floated among the stars, one ruler held a brush that could rewrite human lives with a single stroke. The Jade Emperor, the supreme deity of Taoist tradition, wasn't just a distant god, he was the celestial bureaucrat, his ledgers filled with the exact dates of every birth, marriage, and death. Imagine a cosmic emperor so meticulous that even the number of steps you'd walk in your lifetime was preordained, inscribed in heavenly scrolls guarded by star-clad officials. This wasn't just fantasy, it reflected the ancient Chinese belief in Ming, or destiny, an unchangeable blueprint woven into the fabric of existence. Yet for all his power, the Jade Emperor's decrees weren't always met with silent submission. Folktales brim with mortals who dared to defy him, their stories a thrilling mix of rebellion and cosmic irony. Take the legend of Wei Zheng, a humble scholar whose lifespan was abruptly cut short in the celestial records. When the emperor's emissaries came to collect his soul, Wei simply refused to die, arguing his life's work compiling a vast encyclopedia of knowledge wasn't finished. Astonished by his audacity, the Jade Emperor granted him extra years, proving even heaven's edicts could bend for human determination. Then there's the tale of the Monkey King, Sun Wukong, who stormed the heavens not just to challenge his fate, but to erase his name from the Book of Life and Death altogether. His rebellion was so fierce that the Jade Emperor's armies, dragons, thunder gods, even the Buddha himself had to intervene. But here's the twist: Sun Wukong's struggle wasn't just about immortality. It exposed a haunting question at the heart of Taoist philosophy. If destiny is written, is defiance itself part of the script? Modern Taoist temples still house rituals to appease the Jade Emperor, especially during his birthday celebrations on the 9th day of the Lunar New Year. Devotees burn paper replicas of gold ingots and luxury items, hoping to sweeten their celestial audit. But dig deeper and you'll find a paradox. While Taoism teaches surrender to the natural order, its myths are filled with heroes who rage against it. Maybe that's why these stories endure. They don't just describe fate, they invite us to wrestle with it, to ask whether the brush that writes our lives is held by the gods or by our own defiant hands. Long before the gods and demons of Hindu lore became adversaries, they stood together on the shores of a cosmic sea, united by a desperate gamble. The churning of the ocean of milk, the Samudra Manthan, was no ordinary quest. It was a tug of war between existence and oblivion, with the universe itself as the rope. Picture this: Mount Mandara, uprooted and plunged into the ocean as a churning rod, its base steadied by the king of tortoises, Vishnu in his second avatar. The serpent Vasuki, coiled around the mountain, became the rope, his body pulled by gods on one end and demons on the other. With every heave, the ocean convulsed, spewing forth treasures and terrors alike. A dazzling white horse, a wish-granting jewel, even the goddess of wine. But the prize they sought was Amrita, the nectar of immortality, a single drop of which could tip the cosmic scales forever. What makes this myth so gripping isn't just the spectacle, it's the paradox at its heart. The gods and demons, eternal enemies, had to collaborate to achieve their goal. Without the demon's strength or the god's strategy, the mountain would have sunk into the depths. Yet this uneasy alliance was doomed from the start. The moment the Amrita finally surfaced, their truce shattered. Vishnu, ever the trickster, took the form of the enchantress Mohini, distracting the demons while the gods drank the nectar. The lesson: even in cooperation, the forces of light and darkness could never truly share divinity. But dive deeper and the symbolism becomes even richer. The churning represents the eternal cycle of creation and destruction, a theme echoing through Hindu philosophy. The poisons released during the ordeal, like the deadly halahala that threatened to consume the world, mirror the suffering inherent in existence. It was Shiva, the destroyer, who swallowed the venom to save creation, his throat turning blue as a permanent reminder of sacrifice. This isn't just a tale of rivalry, it's a metaphor for the human condition. Our struggles, our personal churning, yield both blessings and curses, and true immortality isn't found in elixirs, but in the balance between opposing forces. Modern interpretations take this further. Scientists have drawn parallels between the myth and the actual churning of Earth's ancient oceans, where life first emerged from primordial chaos. Yogis see it as an allegory for meditation, where the mind's turbulence eventually reveals inner wisdom. Even today, the ritual of Manthan, persists in Hindu households during festivals where communities churn butter in a symbolic reenactment. The story endures because it speaks to a universal truth: progress demands struggle, and every gain comes with a cost. Whether gods or mortals, we're all caught in the same eternal tug of war, straining toward our own elusive Amrita. Long before Excalibur became the glittering symbol of Arthurian legend, its roots reached back into the misty hills of Wales, where an older, darker magic pulsed through the land. The sword we know as Arthur's birthright wasn't always called Excalibur. In the earliest Welsh tales, it was Caladfwlch, a name that crackles with ancient power, meaning hard cleft or battle breach. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a relic of the otherworld, forged in the same mythic fires as King Bran's enchanted blades. The Mabinogion, a collection of medieval Welsh stories, describes it as a sword so bright it could blind enemies, wielded by heroes long before Arthur drew breath. But here's where the legend twists. The famous sword in the stone story, the test of divine right, wasn't even part of the original myth. That addition came centuries later, courtesy of French poet Robert de Boron, who reshaped Arthur into a Christian messiah figure. In his version, the stone wasn't just a random slab, it was an altar, and the sword bore an inscription: "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all England." This was no accident. De Boron's tale emerged during a time of brutal succession crises, when rulers desperately needed to convince people that power wasn't seized, it was bestowed, etched into destiny by God's own hand. Merlin's role in this drama is equally revealing. The wizard we picture cloaked, wise, whispering prophecies wasn't the original Merlin either. Early Welsh texts speak of Myrddin, a wildman driven mad by battle, howling prophecies in the forests. It was Geoffrey of Monmouth who sanitized him into a courtly advisor, stitching his magic into the sword's legend. Why? To sell the idea that kings weren't chosen by blood or battle, but by supernatural design. When Merlin places the sword in the stone, he's not just setting up a test, he's scripting a divine endorsement, a celestial stamp of approval for Arthur's reign. Archaeology adds another layer to the mystery. In the ruins of Monte Sipi, Italy, a sword lodged in stone, yes, a real one, has been carbon dated to the 12th century, around the time de Boron's version spread. Coincidence or evidence that the legend borrowed from real-life spectacles meant to awe the masses? Either way, the sword's symbolism was potent. In a world where might often made right, the stone was the ultimate propaganda tool, proof that legitimacy wasn't earned but revealed. Yet the most fascinating twist isn't in the past, it's in our modern obsession with the tale. From Disney's Sword in the Stone to Monty Python's absurdist take, Excalibur keeps morphing, reflecting whatever we need it to be. A symbol of hope, of imposter syndrome, even of meme culture. Because whether it's called Caladfwlch or Excalibur, the sword's real power wasn't in its blade, it was in the story. A story that convinced an entire civilization that some people are simply meant to rule, while the rest are destined to kneel. And that's a magic no amount of historical debunking can fully dispel. The legend of Arthur's sword didn't just shape bedtime stories, it forged the very blueprint of power in medieval Europe. When kings like Henry II of England claimed descent from Arthur, or when Richard the Lionheart supposedly rediscovered Excalibur during the Crusades, they weren't just indulging in fantasy. They were weaponizing the myth, wrapping themselves in the aura of divine mandate. The sword in the stone wasn't merely a fairy tale, it was political theater, a script repeated by rulers desperate to prove their legitimacy wasn't earned through blood or gold but written in the stars. Take Edward I, the English monarch who staged elaborate round-table tournaments, even commissioning a replica of Arthur's throne. His goal, to frame his brutal conquest of Wales as the reunification of a lost kingdom, with himself as the rightful heir to Arthur's legacy. Centuries later, Elizabeth I would echo this playbook, portraying herself as a new, once and future queen, her portraits brimming with Arthurian symbols. The message was clear: rebellion wasn't just treason, it was sacrilege, a defiance of destiny itself. Yet the myth's grip didn't fade with armored knights. Modern politicians still clutch Excalibur's hilt, though the language has shifted. When leaders speak of being called to office or invoke providential purpose, they're channeling the same ancient magic. Think of Churchill during Britain's darkest hour, framing himself as the stubborn guardian of a nation's fate, or the soaring rhetoric of American presidents invoking manifest destiny. Even populist movements today lean into the Arthurian archetype, the outsider, chosen to restore a mythical golden age. What's chilling isn't the myth's persistence, but its flexibility. Arthur's sword gleams just as brightly in dystopian fiction as it does in campaign ads. From the once and future king's disillusioned Merlin to the Dark Tower's cyborg Arthur, storytellers keep probing the same question: who gets to claim Destiny's mantle, and at what cost? The answer, it seems, is written not in stone, but in our unshakable longing to believe that somewhere, just beyond reach, there's a blade waiting to be pulled, a throne waiting to be filled, and a story insisting that power in the right hands isn't taken, it's bestowed. The Aztecs didn't just worship the sun, they believed they owed it blood. According to their myths, the world had already been destroyed 4 times, each collapse marked by the fall of a previous sun. Now they lived under the 5th sun, Tanatia, a deity who demanded a terrible price to keep moving across the sky. Without regular offerings of human hearts, the sun would halt, plunging the world into eternal darkness. This wasn't metaphor or poetry. It was the core of Aztec cosmology, a belief so central that their entire calendar revolved around the binding of the years, a 52-year cycle where failure to perform the right rituals would trigger apocalypse. At the heart of this myth was the story of Nanahuatzin, the humblest of the gods, who threw himself into a cosmic bonfire to become the 5th sun. But his sacrifice wasn't a one-time event. The Aztecs saw his act as a contract. The sun would keep shining only if mortals fed it with their own lives. That's why the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan ran with blood during festivals like Panquetzalistli. When prisoners of war were led up the pyramid steps, their chests slit open by obsidian blades, their still beating hearts raised to the sky. To modern eyes, it's horrifying. To the Aztecs, it was as necessary as breathing. They called it Nextlahualtin, the debt payment. But here's where history twists the myth into something darker. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, led by Cortés, the Aztecs didn't see them as mere invaders. Prophecies had long foretold the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god from the east. The year Cortés landed, exactly 52 years after the last binding of the year's ceremony, a cycle the Aztecs feared might end in doom. Moctezuma's hesitation, his gifts of gold, even his initial hospitality, they weren't just diplomacy. They were acts of cosmic desperation, an attempt to appease what might be divine retribution. The Spanish, with their gleaming armor and alien weapons, seemed like walking omens. Archaeology confirms how deep this dread ran. Excavations at the Templo Mayor reveal layers of sacrificial offerings, jade, shells, and the bones of children, all left in frantic attempts to stave off disaster. But the cruelest irony, the Spanish conquest didn't just fulfill Aztec prophecies of collapse, it erased their sun god's very reason for existing. The missionaries smashed Tenochtitlan's idols, replacing him with a new god who'd already sacrificed himself once for all. The 5th sun didn't die in darkness. It was drowned in holy water and gunpowder, its debt unpaid, its story rewritten by the victors, yet fragments of the old belief linger. Modern Mexicans still celebrate the Dia de los Muertos, where offerings of food and flowers echo the ancient idea of feeding the unseen. And in remote villages, some still whisper that the 5th sun's time is running out, that its hunger will return. Maybe that's why the myth still chills us. It's not just about the Aztecs, it's about the terrifying idea that civilization is always one sacrifice away from collapse, that the light we take for granted might, at any moment, demand payment in blood. Beneath the swirling waters of the River Boyne, where the trees whispered in a language only the Druids understood, swam a creature older than Ireland itself, the salmon of wisdom. Its silver scales glittered with the knowledge of all things past, present, and future, a prize sought by poets and seers for centuries. According to legend, the first person to taste its flesh would gain its boundless wisdom. But there was a catch. The salmon could only be caught by one pure of heart, and its knowledge carried a price. This was the myth that young Fionn mac Cumhaill stumbled into quite by accident. The great poet Fionn Esses had spent 7 years hunting the salmon, only to finally catch it and entrust its cooking to his apprentice, Fionn. As the fish roasted over the fire, a blister formed on its skin. When Fionn pressed it down with his thumb, the burning juice seared his flesh. Instinctively, he sucked his thumb to soothe the pain, and in that moment the salmon's power flooded into him. Fionn Esses, watching in stunned silence, realized the truth. Destiny had bypassed the master and chosen the boy. From then on, whenever Fionn needed answers, he would chew his thumb, summoning the salmon's wisdom like a living library. But here's what makes this myth so fascinating. It wasn't just a whimsical tale of accidental enlightenment. It reflected the Druidic belief that true knowledge couldn't be seized through force or study alone. Like the salmon that eluded capture for generations, wisdom had to be received, not taken. The Druids, who memorized countless verses and laws without writing them down, saw knowledge as a sacred current, something you had to immerse yourself in, not possess. Fionn's story mirrors their initiation rites, where apprentices learned through osmosis, absorbing truths whispered in sacred groves or revealed in half-understood dreams. Compare this to other forbidden wisdom myths, and the contrasts are striking. In the Hebrew Bible, Eve's bite of the forbidden fruit brings expulsion from Eden, knowledge as a divine trespass. Greek Prometheus steals fire from the gods and is chained to a rock for eternity. But Fionn, his enlightenment comes through humility, even clumsiness. He doesn't conquer the salmon, he serves it, tending the fire like any dutiful apprentice. The wisdom chooses him precisely because he isn't grasping for it. Modern scholars see echoes of this in psychology, the eureka moment that strikes when you stop straining for answers. Even neuroscience hints at it, with studies showing how insight often flares up during mundane tasks like Archimedes in his bath. The salmon's lesson endures because it speaks to a universal truth. The brightest sparks of understanding often come when we least expect them, gifted not to the arrogant, but to those willing to burn their thumbs for a taste of the unknown. Yet there's a darker thread here too. Fionn's wisdom, for all its power, couldn't prevent tragedy. His failed marriage, the betrayal of his kin, the cyclical violence of Irish folklore. Maybe that's the salmon's final secret. Knowledge doesn't shield you from pain, it just makes you see it coming. Hidden beyond the veils of the unseen, carved in eternal script, lies the Islamic tablet of destiny, Al-Law al-Mahfuz. Unlike the crumbling stone tablets of earthly kings, this cosmic ledger, mentioned in the Quran, holds everything that was, is, or ever will be. Every leaf that falls, every whisper in the wind, every heartbeat, all inscribed before creation itself. But here's the paradox that's haunted scholars for centuries. If destiny is already written, do our choices even matter? The Quran paints a vivid picture. In Surah Al-Hadid, it states, "No calamity strikes except by permission of Allah, and whoever believes in Allah, he will guide his heart." Yet in the same breath, it urges humanity to strive, to choose righteousness, to act. This tension between divine decree and human agency forms the core of one of Islam's oldest theological debates. The Mu'tazilites, an early school of thought, championed free will, arguing that a just God wouldn't punish people for preordained sins. Their opponents, the Asharites, countered that Allah's knowledge is absolute. Every action, even the turn of an ant's leg, unfolds by his will. Take the story of Moses and Kidda from Surah Al-Kahf. When Kidda inexplicably scuttles a boat and kills a young boy, Moses is horrified until Kidda reveals these acts were divine interventions to prevent greater harm. The lesson: human perception is limited. What seems cruel or random might be part of a wisdom we can't fathom. This narrative threads through Islamic mysticism too. Sufi poets like Rumi wrote of surrendering to the Book of Fate, not as passive resignation but as trust in a grander design, yet the debate rages on. Modern Muslims grapple with it daily when a loved one dies before their time or when prayers seem unanswered. Is it qadar, predestination, or did their choices play a role? Even the Hadith offer a middle path: strive as if everything depends on you and rely on Allah as if everything depends on Him. The tablet isn't a prison, it's a mirror reflecting the profound interplay between the eternal and the ephemeral. Perhaps that's why this myth endures. It doesn't just belong to theologians. It lives in the mother praying over a sick child, the student choosing between honesty and deceit, the refugee stepping onto a storm-tossed boat. The tablet's ink may be dry, but the page is still turning, and we're the ones holding the pen. The world plunged into eternal night when Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess of Shinto belief, retreated into the heavenly rock cave. It began with her brother Susanoo, the storm god, whose chaos knew no bounds, shattering her sacred rice fields, flinging a flayed horse into her weaving hall and driving her attendants to their deaths. Grief-stricken and furious, Amaterasu sealed herself inside the cave, and without her light the lands withered, crops failed, spirits ran rampant, and the gods themselves trembled. This wasn't just a celestial tantrum, it was the unraveling of creation, a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. Desperation birthed ingenuity. The 8 million gods gathered outside the cave, devising a plan as audacious as it was absurd. They fashioned a mirror of polished bronze, hung jewels from a sacred sakaki tree, and summoned the goddess Uzum, whose dance would become legend. Uzum stamped her feet on an upturned tub, chanting wildly, stripping her robes until the gods roared with laughter. Curious at the uproar, Amaterasu cracked the cave's entrance open just enough to ask why they celebrated without her. Because there's a goddess greater than you. Uzum declared, pointing to the mirror. When Amaterasu leaned closer, her own dazzling reflection stunned her. In that moment of wonder, the gods yanked her free, shoving a sacred rope behind her to bar retreat. Light flooded the world again, and life stirred from its frozen slumber. But this myth wasn't just entertainment for ancient Japan. It was the bedrock of imperial legitimacy. The mirror that lured Amaterasu out, that very object known as Yota no Kagami, became one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan's emperors, proof of their divine descent. Even today, it's enshrined at Ai's Grand Shrine, though no living eye has seen it, its power too potent for mortal gaze. The rituals performed during the myth, from the dance to the mirror's use, are echoed in Kagyura ceremonies, where shrine maidens reenact Uzum's steps to keep the sun's favor. Modern scholars see deeper layers here. Amaterasu's retreat mirrors seasonal fears, the winter solstice when the sun's light seems to vanish, or volcanic eruptions that choked ancient Japan in ash. The myth isn't just about celestial drama, it's a survival guide teaching that darkness can be dispelled through unity, creativity, and a little divine comedy. And perhaps that's why the tale endures. In a world still shadowed by chaos, the image of laughter coaxing light back from the brink feels less like fantasy and more like a very old, very wise recipe for hope. Deep in the forests of old Slavic lands, where birch trees whispered secrets and the hearth fire crackled with ancient magic, 3 shadowy figures watched over every cradle. The Rozhenitsy mother, maiden, and crone were no ordinary spirits. They arrived in the dead of night when a child took its first breath, carrying a spindle and thread to weave the newborn's destiny. Unlike the grim fates of Greek myth, these goddesses weren't merciless weavers. They were protectors, nurturers, often depicted with offerings of honey and bread left at crossroads by hopeful parents. Their threads weren't just measurements of life, but living tapestries bright with joy, frayed with sorrow, yet always cradled in divine hands. But when Christianity spread through Slavic lands, the Rozhenicy didn't vanish. They shape-shifted, reborn as the Sudenicy fate spinners now stripped of their warmth, their roles twisted into something darker. No longer guardians, they became judges, appearing 3 nights after a birth to pronounce an infant's lot in life. Folktales warn of their verdicts. One would smile, one would weep, and the last would sit silent, her unfinished thread hinting at a life cut short. The Sudenicy's arrival was met with rituals to sway their mercy, a midnight feast laid out with wine and wheat, or a knife plunged into the threshold to cut misfortune away. Archaeology reveals how deep this belief ran. Excavated Slavic amulets show triple goddess motifs etched into bone and clay, while medieval chronicles scold peasants for pagan offerings to the 3 women. Yet even in the 19th century, midwives in remote villages still whispered prayers to the Rozhenicy, blending their names with saints' proof that some magic refuses to die. What makes these spirits so haunting isn't just their persistence, but their duality. The Rozhenicy represent the tender side of destiny, the idea that fate might bend to a mother's tears or a father's plea. The Sudenicy, though, reflect the chilling truth that some things, no matter how fervently we bargain, remain beyond our control. Together, they embody the Slav's raw, unflinching view of life, a dance between nurture and inevitability, where every thread spun is both a gift and a verdict. Deep in the Duat, the Egyptian underworld where shadows whispered secrets and gods walked with jackal heads, every soul faced the ultimate test, not of strength or wealth, but of truth. The weighing of the heart was no simple ceremony. It was the moment of reckoning where Anubis, the silent guardian of the dead, would place a heart on one side of his golden scales and the feather of Maat, goddess of cosmic order, on the other. If the heart balanced perfectly, the soul could pass into paradise. If it sank, heavy with guilt, Ammit the devourer, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, would lunge forward, swallowing it whole, erasing the sinner from existence. This wasn't just divine theater. It was the psychological engine of Egyptian morality, woven into the fabric of daily life. The feather represented Maat, not just justice, but harmony, balance, the very glue holding the universe together. To violate it was to risk chaos, or Isfet, the collapse of society itself. Imagine living with that certainty, every lie, every theft, every moment of cruelty literally weighing down your soul. Tomb paintings show scribes, farmers, even pharaohs trembling before the scales, their fates hanging by a feather's breadth. But the myth's brilliance lay in its flexibility. The Egyptians weren't naive, they knew humans faltered. That's why the Book of the Dead included spells to lighten the heart, like the famous negative confession, where the dead could proclaim, "I have not stolen bread from the hungry, I have not caused tears, I have not lied in the tribunal of truth." These weren't loopholes, they were guideposts, a moral checklist for the living. Even the poorest could afford a papyrus scrap with these words, ensuring they'd walk into the afterlife armed with purity. Archaeology reveals how deeply this belief took root. Amulets shaped like Maat's feather were buried with the dead, while Ostraka pottery shards record ordinary people's pleas for forgiveness. The message was clear. Morality wasn't just about fear of punishment, but the yearning to join the cosmic dance of balance. And perhaps that's why this myth endures. In a world where justice often feels arbitrary, the image of a feather leveling the scales still resonates, a reminder that some truths are weightless, yet they anchor the universe. The darkness of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, wasn't just a place of death. It was a labyrinth of trickery where the lords of decay ruled with riddles and traps. Into this nightmare stepped the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque, not as conquerors but as players in the deadliest ball game ever conceived. The twins' story, etched into the Popol Vuh, wasn't just a myth, it was a cosmic blueprint, a tale of resurrection woven into the very fabric of Maya time. The lords of Xibalba had lured the twins' father and uncle to the underworld years earlier, defeating them in a rigged ball game before sacrificing them and mounting their skulls in a ghoulish trophy rack. Now the twins arrived to avenge them, but the underworld gods had other plans. Each test was a metaphor for the brutal realities of life and death. The dark house, filled with jagged obsidian blades, mirrored the peril of the dry season when crops withered and famine loomed. The bat house, swarming with razor-winged creatures, echoed the sudden chaos of storms that could destroy a harvest overnight, and the ball game itself. It was no sport, it was a ritual reenactment of the sun's journey through the underworld, the rubber ball symbolizing the celestial body that died each evening only to be reborn at dawn. What makes the twins' trials so gripping isn't just their ingenuity, like outwitting the lords by pretending to sacrifice each other, but how deeply they reflect Maya cosmology. When the twins finally defeat the lords of Xibalba, they don't destroy the underworld. Instead, they reorder it, demoting the death gods to mere healers and fortune-tellers. This wasn't just victory, it was a divine compromise, acknowledging that death couldn't be erased, only balanced. The myth's ties to agriculture are unmistakable. The twins' resurrection of their father from the ball court mirrors the planting of maize seeds buried, seemingly lifeless, only to sprout anew. Royalty seized on this symbolism, with kings like the mighty Yaks Nun Ayin portraying themselves as the hero twins reborn, their victories on the ball court guaranteeing the return of rains and the fertility of the land. Even the rubber balls used in games were sacred, their bouncing mimicking the movement of celestial bodies. Modern excavations at sites like Capon reveal ball courts aligned with solstice sunrises, while carvings show players dressed as gods reenacting the twins' trials. The myth wasn't just a story, it was a script for survival, a reminder that even in the darkest depths, the game wasn't over. It was just waiting for the next move. Long before Genesis told of heavens and earth, the Babylonians sang of a far older chaos, a time when only two beings existed: Apsu, the sweet waters, and Tiamat, the salt waters, swirling together in the formless void. Their union birthed the gods, but the noise of these young deities soon became unbearable. Apsu plotted to destroy them, only to be slain by his own great-grandson, E. This act awakened Tiamat's fury. The primordial mother, once gentle, transformed into a monstrous dragon, birthing an army of demons to avenge her mate. The gods, terrified, turned to the youngest among them, Marduk, god of storms, and offered him the throne of heaven if he could slay her. What followed wasn't just a battle, it was the birth of the cosmos itself. Marduk's victory was as brutal as it was creative. He rode into battle on a chariot pulled by four winds, armed with a net, a mace, and arrows of lightning. When Tiamat opened her jaws to swallow him, he hurled winds into her belly, inflating her like a grotesque balloon before piercing her heart with an arrow. Then came the act that shaped reality. He split her corpse like a clamshell, fashioning her ribs into the vault of heaven and her tail into the earth. Her weeping eyes became the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates, while her defeated army of demons became the stars, forever bound to the night sky as constellations. This wasn't just myth-making, it was ancient science, an attempt to explain the origins of land, rivers, and celestial bodies through divine struggle. The Enuma Elish's deeper metaphor is impossible to miss. Tiamat represents primal chaos, unknowable, untamable, the wildness that existed before civilization. Marduk, in contrast, embodies order, structure, the Babylonian ideal of kingship. His triumph mirrors the rise of Babylon itself, a city that saw its rule as divinely ordained to impose hierarchy on a disordered world. The poem was recited annually during the New Year festival, reinforcing the king's role as Marduk's earthly counterpart, tasked with maintaining cosmic balance. But the myth's legacy extends beyond politics. Those demons Marduk shackled in the sky, they became the foundation of Babylonian astrology. Each constellation was thought to hold power over human affairs, their positions dictating fate. The zodiac we know today, with its 12 signs, traces its roots to this very story. Even the word zodiac comes from the Greek zodiakos kyklos, meaning circle of animals, a distant echo of Tiamat's monstrous children frozen in the stars. Modern excavations of Babylonian clay tablets reveal meticulous star charts, proving how deeply this myth influenced their understanding of the universe. The Enuma Elish wasn't just a creation tale. It was a user's manual for existence, explaining everything from seasonal floods to the movement of planets. And perhaps that's why it still captivates. In an age where scientists speak of dark matter and cosmic inflation, we're still chasing the same question: how did order emerge from chaos? The Babylonians answered it with a dragon's corpse and a god's ambition, a story as vast and turbulent as the universe it sought to explain. No demigod ever wrestled with daylight quite like Maui. This Polynesian trickster didn't just chase the sun, he ambushed it, lassoed it, and forced it to bargain. Before Maui's intervention, days flashed by in a blur. The sun raced recklessly across the sky, leaving farmers barely enough time to tend their crops and fishermen scrambling to haul in nets before darkness fell. People starved, exhausted by the relentless pace. So Maui crafted a rope from his sister's sacred hair, woven with incantations strong enough to tether a god. He journeyed to the volcano where the sun rose, hiding until the fiery orb emerged, then sprang like a fisherman, netting the world's most dangerous catch. The struggle that followed wasn't just physical, it was cosmic. The sun roared, scorching the earth as it thrashed against the ropes. But Maui, grinning through the heat, demanded the unthinkable: move slower. And to everyone's astonishment, the sun agreed. From that day forward, its path stretched long and languid, granting humans the gift of fruitful days and restful nights. What's fascinating isn't just the audacity of the myth, it's how many cultures tell eerily similar stories. The Navajo speak of twin heroes who shot arrows at the sun, pinning it to the sky until it promised moderation. In Greek lore, it's Phaethon who loses control of his father Helios' chariot, scorching the earth until Zeus intervenes with a thunderbolt. Even the Chinese legend of Huyi, the archer who shot down 9 of 10 suns to save the planet from burning, carries the same theme: humanity's precarious dance with celestial forces. Dig deeper, and these myths reveal more than just creative explanations for solar cycles. They're allegories for agriculture, survival, and humanity's fragile balance with nature. The Maori version of Maui's story emphasizes his mother's frustration at never having enough daylight to dry her cloth, a detail that grounds the cosmic in the domestic. Similarly, the Cherokee tale of Grandmother Spider persuading the sun to share its warmth speaks to a universal human longing, not to conquer nature but to coax it into cooperation. Modern science tells us Earth's rotation dictates the length of our days, but these myths persist because they answer a deeper question: how do we live in a world that doesn't bend to our needs? Maui's answer was cunning over force, negotiation over domination. His rope wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of humanity's boldest hope, that even the gods might listen if we're clever enough to ask. Long before the Book of Revelation painted its visions of fiery judgment, the ancient Persians spoke of a different kind of end, one not of destruction but of ultimate repair. In the Zoroastrian faith, the Frashokriti, or renovation, was the moment when Ahura Mazda, the god of light, would finally triumph over his eternal adversary, Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction. This wasn't just an apocalypse, it was a cosmic reset where the world would be purged of all lies, decay, and corruption, then reborn in a state of radiant perfection. Imagine a universe where every wound healed, every injustice was righted, and even the dead would rise not as ghosts but as living beings reunited in a world without shadows. The imagery is strikingly familiar. A river of molten metal would flow across the earth, burning away the wicked but feeling like warm milk to the righteous. The righteous would cross a bridge widened into a grand highway, while the damned would find it narrowed to a razor's edge. The parallels to later Christian and Islamic eschatology, hellfire, judgment, resurrection, are impossible to ignore. Even the idea of a final savior, the Saoshyant, born of a virgin and destined to lead humanity into the new age, echoes messianic prophecies across religions. Some scholars argue that when Jewish exiles lived under Persian rule during the Babylonian captivity, they absorbed these ideas, weaving them into their own visions of the end times. But what makes the Frashocraty unique isn't just its influence, it's its optimism. Unlike the nihilistic Ragnarok or the splintered chaos of Revelation's beasts and plagues, this was a promise of restoration. The world wouldn't be discarded, it would be renewed like a tarnished mirror polished back to brilliance. Even Angra-Mainyu's defeat wasn't framed as a violent conquest, but as the natural result of his own choices. Evil in Zoroastrian thought was a parasite, a corruption that would eventually exhaust itself, leaving only truth behind. Modern Zoroastrians still anticipate this transformation, though their traditions have adapted. Some parse ancient texts for signs of the Saoshyant's coming, while others see the Frashocraty as a metaphor for personal enlightenment. Yet the core idea remains that darkness, no matter how entrenched, is temporary. In a world haunted by war and climate crises, the notion of a universe that doesn't end in ash but in repair feels less like ancient dogma and more like the oldest, boldest hope of all. Beneath the Arctic ice, where the freezing darkness presses down like a weight, the Inuit tell of Sedna, the one-fingered goddess who rules the ocean's bounty with fury and grief. Her story begins not as a divine tale, but as a human tragedy. Sedna was once a young woman betrayed by her own father. When she refused to marry a suitor he chose, he dragged her into his kayak and during a violent storm threw her overboard to drown. As she clung desperately to the boat's edge, her father hacked off her fingers one by one with a knife. Each digit that sank into the depths transformed into a sea creature: seals, whales, walruses, the very animals the Inuit relied on for survival. Sedna herself sank to the ocean floor, her mutilated hands twisting into claws, her heart hardening into ice. She became the mother and jailer of all marine life, her rage so vast that with a flick of her spirit, she could withhold the sea's gifts entirely. This wasn't just a cautionary tale about filial disobedience. It was a survival manual etched in myth. Inuit hunters knew that Sedna's favor meant the difference between feast and famine. When food grew scarce, shamans would descend into trances, their souls journeying to her underwater lair to comb the tangles from her hair, a task her clawed hands could no longer perform. Only by soothing her anguish would she release the animals trapped in her grasp. The rituals were precise. Hunters avoided mixing land and sea meats, fearing it would offend her. Taboos surrounding the preparation of seals, never cutting their flippers in a way that mimicked her wounds, were strictly observed. Even the bones of hunted animals were returned to the water, a gesture of respect to the goddess who could reclaim her children at will. Sedna's myth reveals a profound ecological ethos. Unlike gods who demanded worship, she demanded accountability. The Inuit didn't see the ocean as a limitless pantry, but as a fragile pact between human and divine. Waste or arrogance could sever that bond. Modern climate change has twisted this balance further. As ice melts and species vanish, some elders whisper that Sedna's anger has never been greater. Her story, once a lesson in humility, now feels like a prophecy, a warning that the sea's patience, like its goddess, has limits. Yet there's a haunting beauty in how the myth endures. Contemporary Inuit artists carve her image from soapstone, her flowing hair teeming with seal and fish forms. filmmakers reimagine her as an ecological avenger, her wrath directed at oil drills and pollution. Sedna is no relic, she's a living voice from the depths, reminding us that survival isn't just about taking, it's about listening to the storms we've stirred. In the groves of ancient Yorubaland, where the rustling palm fronds whispered secrets of the unseen, the oracles of Ifa held the wisdom of the gods in their hands. Orunmila, the deity of wisdom and divination, didn't just watch over destiny, he unraveled it, one sacred palm nut at a time. 16 palm nuts to be exact, each one a key to the vast library of Odu, the divine verses that held the answers to every human dilemma. The Babalawos, Ifa's high priests, would cast these nuts onto a divination tray, reading their patterns like celestial braille. Every configuration pointed to one of 256 Odu, each with its own poems, proverbs, and prescriptions, a spiritual algorithm refined over millennia. But this was no parlor trick. Divination sessions could last hours, with the Babalawo chanting verses, interpreting sacrifices, and guiding seekers through crossroads both literal and metaphysical. A farmer might ask when to plant, a king might seek counsel on war. The answers weren't vague, they were startlingly precise, tied to Yoruba cosmology's core belief that fate wasn't fixed, but a tapestry of choices woven with divine threads. The Odu didn't just predict, they prescribed herbs to heal, rituals to avert misfortune, even songs to soothe angry ancestors. When enslavement scattered Yoruba people across the Atlantic, Ifa didn't disappear. It transformed. In Cuba, it merged with Catholicism under persecution, birthing Santeria. Orunmila became synonymous with Saint Francis, his wisdom hidden behind holy icons. The 16 palm nuts survived as the Ikin, still cast by Santeria's equivalent priests, the Babalawos. In Brazil, Candomblé preserved the Odu as Jogo de Buzios, using cowrie shells to channel the same wisdom. Even the language endured. Yoruba phrases like As, divine power, and Ori, personal destiny, still punctuate diaspora rituals. The resilience of Ifa reveals something profound. Unlike oracles that faded with their temples, this system thrived because it wasn't tied to a place but to people. Modern Babalawos from Lagos to Miami still consult the same Odu, proving that some threads of destiny are too strong to break. And perhaps that's the greatest divination of all, the unshakable truth that wisdom, when guarded well, outlives even the darkest storms. Hidden in the monasteries of Tibet, painted on temple walls and whispered in the chants of monks, lies a map of existence so intricate it could only be drawn in a circle, the wheel of life. This isn't just art, it's a cosmic flowchart, a visual guide to the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth dictated by karma. At its center, 3 animals, a pig, a snake, and a rooster, chase each other's tails in an endless loop. The pig symbolizes ignorance, the snake represents hatred, and the rooster stands for desire. Together, they form the engine of suffering, the driving force that keeps the wheel spinning. Radiating outward from this core are 6 realms, each a distinct destiny shaped by past actions. The god realm glitters with pleasure and power, its inhabitants lounging in celestial bliss, but this isn't heaven as we imagine it. Even gods are trapped in the wheel, their pride dooming them to fall when their karma exhausts. The jealous god realm simmers with envy and rivalry, where beings wage eternal wars over fleeting power. The human realm, perched precariously between higher and lower states, offers both suffering and something precious, the chance to awaken. Here, joy and sorrow alternate like seasons, teaching lessons no other realm can. Then come the lower realms, where the weight of negative karma pulls souls into increasingly desperate existences. The animal realm is one of instinct and fear, where beings are hunted or harnessed, oblivious to their own bondage. The hungry ghost realm is a landscape of unfulfilled craving, its inhabitants cursed with swollen bellies and needle throats, forever starving despite banquets just out of reach. And at the bottom, the hell realm's not a single pit of fire, but many layers of torment, each tailored to the sins of its inhabitants. Some freeze in eternal ice, others burn in unquenchable flames, all trapped until their negative karma burns away. Yet what makes the Wheel of Life so profound isn't just its depiction of suffering, it's the figure clinging to its rim. Yama, the Lord of Death, grips the wheel with fangs bared, a reminder that impermanence governs every realm. No pleasure lasts, no torment is eternal. Even Yama himself is bound by karma, his grip a symbol of mortality's inevitability rather than its cruelty. The wheel's outer edge holds the key to breaking free. 12 images, like a clock of causation, illustrate how ignorance spawns craving, which fuels rebirth, which locks beings into the cycle. But there's an escape, a lone figure, often the Buddha, pointing beyond the wheel to nirvana, not a place, but a state beyond all states where the engine of karma finally stills. Modern psychologists have noted the wheel's uncanny resonance with human behavior. The hungry ghost realm mirrors addiction, the jealous god realm echoes toxic ambition. Even the god realm's trap of complacency finds parallels in the empty pursuit of comfort. The Wheel of Life isn't just a Buddhist teaching, it's a mirror asking which realm we're spinning toward with every choice we make. While Greek poets sang of the Moirai, three sisters spinning, measuring, and cutting each mortal's thread, their Roman counterparts, the Parchi, wielded shears with even colder precision. Nona spun the thread, Decima measured its length, and Morta, whose name echoes the Latin word for death, snipped it without hesitation. Where the Greeks hinted that fate might bend, through prayer, cleverness, or divine whim, Roman writers like Ovid painted destiny as a rigid tapestry, unyielding even to the gods. In his Metamorphoses, Jupiter himself complains that he cannot save his mortal son Sarpedon from the Parchi's decree. The fates forbid it, he grumbles, powerless against their verdict. This wasn't just artistic flair, it reflected Rome's obsession with order. The Greek Moirai worked in shadows, their origins murky as the misty caves they supposedly inhabited. The Parchi, however, were bureaucrats of the cosmic ledger, their rituals mirrored in the strict hierarchies of Roman law. Annual festivals like the Parilia saw citizens leap through bonfires, not to change fate, but to align themselves with its inexorable flow. Even the act of naming carried weight. While the Greeks spoke of moira as a person's allotted portion, the Romans used photum, literally, that which has been spoken, a binding utterance no one could unsay. Yet Ovid's genius lay in how he humanized this fatalism. His Tristia, written in exile, seethes with bitterness toward Augustus, who banished him. But rather than blame the emperor, Ovid points to the Parchi, weaving his suffering into their grand design. In doing so, he transforms his personal anguish into universal truth. Resistance is futile, but storytelling might outlast even fate. Centuries later, his words would whisper through Shakespeare's tragedies, where characters rail against the stars yet fulfill their prophesied ends. The Parchi's threads, it seems, stretch farther than even they could measure. Gilgamesh was no ordinary king, he was 2/3 god, 1/3 man. A storm of strength and pride who built towering walls around Uruk and carved his name into the very bones of the earth. But when Enkidu, his beloved friend forged by the gods to temper his arrogance, died in his arms, something broke inside him. Not grief, terror. For the first time, the king who feared nothing stared into the abyss of his own mortality and screamed. His quest for immortality wasn't just a desperate scramble to escape death. It was the first recorded existential crisis, a 3,000-year-old echo of humanity's oldest question. If even heroes must turn to dust, what's the point of glory? The journey that followed reads like a nightmare fever dream. Gilgamesh abandons his throne, tearing off his royal robes and wandering the wilderness in animal skins, his matted hair thick with grief. He fights lions not for honor, but because their roars distract him from the silence in his own head. When he finally reaches the ends of the earth, where the twin peaks of Mashu guard the path to the underworld, it's not a god or demon who blocks his way, it's a tavern keeper. Shijuri, the wise woman who serves drinks at the edge of existence, takes one look at his sunken eyes and offers advice no epic hero wants to hear. You will never find the life you seek. Fill your belly with good things, cherish the child who holds your hand, let your wife delight in your embrace. This is the work of man, but Gilgamesh refuses to listen. He presses on, finding Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the gods' great flood, who delivers the cruelest lesson of all. To prove Gilgamesh worthy of eternal life, he challenges him to stay awake for 7 days, a test the exhausted king fails instantly, crumbling into sleep like any mortal. When he wakes, Utnapishtim shows him the loaves of bread his wife baked each day he slept, now moldering in stages from fresh to rotten. The message is unmistakable. Decay isn't just inevitable, it's already happening. Even as Gilgamesh rages, time is eating him alive, yet there's a bitter irony to his final failure. The gods do grant him a chance at immortality, a plant growing at the bottom of the ocean that restores youth. He retrieves it, only to lose it moments later when a snake slithers away with the prize, shedding its skin as proof of the gift's power. That snake's discarded skin might be the most haunting image in all of mythology. Gilgamesh kneels in the mud, weeping not for the plant, but for the realization that even his grandest triumphs are fleeting. The epic doesn't end with a hero crowned in eternal life, but a broken man returning to Uruk, running his hands over the walls he built, finally understanding their true purpose. They won't save him from death, but they'll outlast him, and that, the story whispers, is the closest any mortal gets to forever. What makes Gilgamesh's story so timeless isn't its fantastical trials, but its raw humanity. When modern scientists discovered the real walls of Uruk, their foundations dating back to 2600 BC, they weren't just unearthing a city, they were touching the very stones Gilgamesh gripped when he faced the truth. His epic isn't about defeating death, it's about learning to kneel before it, and in that kneeling somehow standing taller than ever. Across the vast red deserts and tangled rainforests of Australia, the Aboriginal peoples speak of a time before time, the dream time when ancestral beings strode across the empty land, singing the world into existence. These weren't just gods or spirits, they were creators whose very footsteps became rivers, whose laughter sparked thunderstorms, whose blood turned to ochre in the soil. But here's what makes their stories unlike any other. These creation journeys weren't just recorded in myths, they were etched into the land itself through songlines, invisible pathways crisscrossing the continent, each one a living map of destiny. A songline isn't merely a story or a song. It's a navigation system, a legal document, and a sacred hymn fused into one. Imagine walking through the desert with an elder who points to a rock formation and begins to sing. The melody describes how the rainbow serpent carved that very gully in the dreamtime, how her body coiled to form the valley ahead, how the rhythm of the song matches the precise number of steps between landmarks. For tens of thousands of years, these songs have functioned as oral GPS, allowing people to traverse thousands of kilometers without maps or compasses. Miss a verse and you might miss the only waterhole for days, but more astonishing than their practicality is their unbroken lineage. Some songlines are so ancient they predate the last ice age, passed down through generations without a single written word, surviving colonization, displacement, and the modern world's roar. The lore of destiny here isn't abstract, it's coded into the landscape. When a Jawoyn elder sings the story of Beulah, the creator ancestor who became the stone country near Catherine, they're not just recounting a tale. They're reaffirming a covenant. This land was shaped by ancestral will, and its people are bound to it through ritual and memory. Unlike Greek or Norse myths, where fate is dictated by distant gods, Aboriginal destiny is participatory. Ceremonies like corroborees don't just honor the dream time, they renew it, weaving human lives back into the cosmic pattern the ancestors began. Modern science has only deepened the mystery. Researchers using satellite mapping have found that songlines often trace ancient trade routes, migratory paths of animals, and even geological fault lines, knowledge encoded millennia before seismographs existed. When a Walpiri elder sings the journey of the seven sisters across the night sky, their lyrics align with the Pleiades star cluster's movement, tracking seasons better than any calendar. These aren't coincidences, they're evidence of an oral tradition so precise it rivals written archives. Yet for all their ingenuity, songlines face extinction. Since European settlement, hundreds have been fragmented or lost as languages vanish and sacred sites are destroyed. But in communities like Arnhem Land, a quiet revolution is unfolding. Young Aboriginal artists are painting songlines onto canvases, not as static images but as living narratives, dots and lines that pulse with the same rhythm as the songs. Digital projects now archive elders' voices singing country, ensuring the melodies outlast mortal throats, because the cruelest fate wouldn't be the end of these stories, it would be a world that no longer remembers how to listen. The Book of Revelation doesn't whisper its visions, it screams them in fire and blood, with symbols so dense they've fueled 2,000 years of debate. At its heart ride the four horsemen, those grim heralds of apocalypse who have haunted everything from medieval art to heavy metal lyrics. The first, astride a white horse, carries a bow but no arrows. Some scholars argue he represents conquest, others pestilence, still others the seductive rise of false messiahs. The red horseman follows, brandishing a sword to take peace from the earth, while the black rider holds scales, signaling famine's cruel economy. But it's the pale fourth horseman, Death himself, riding with Hades at his heels, who chills the bone. Together, they're not just metaphors, they're a cascading collapse, each disaster triggering the next in a spiral no army or harvest can stop. What's startling isn't just their violence, but how these riders mirror real historical nightmares. When the Black Death ravaged Europe in the 1300s, killing a third of the continent, priests saw the pale horse galloping through their villages. The famines of the Little Ice Age, when crops failed year after year, felt like the black horseman's scales tipping toward despair. Even today, conspiracy theorists link the white horseman to pandemics or globalist takeovers, proving how fluid these symbols remain. Yet the horsemen are just the opening act. Revelation's most controversial passage, the 1,000-year reign of Christ or millennium, has split believers for centuries. Premillennialists await a literal 1,000-year golden age after cataclysmic tribulation, while postmillennialists believe humanity must build God's kingdom on earth before Christ returns. Amillennialists, though, dismiss the number as symbolic, seeing the millennium as Christ's spiritual reign in believers' hearts right now. These aren't just theological squabbles, they've shaped empires. The Puritans who sailed to America believed they were preparing the New Jerusalem, while 19th-century revivalists like William Miller famously predicted Christ's return in 1844, leaving thousands disillusioned when the date passed. Modern doomsday cults twist these passages into ever more elaborate timelines. From the Branch Davidians' fiery standoff at Waco to the Heaven's Gate suicides timed with the Hale-Bopp comet, Revelation's imagery becomes a self-fulfilling script. Even mainstream politicians invoke its language, with leaders likening foreign conflicts to Armageddon or vaccines to the mark of the beast. The irony. The original text was likely coded resistance against Roman persecution, not a roadmap to the future. John of Patmos wrote in symbols to protect his flock, never imagining his metaphors would one day be weaponized, or that the real apocalypse might be our endless obsession with the end itself. High in the Alborz Mountains, where the air thins and the rocks glow like embers at dawn, nests a creature older than empires, the Simurgh. This isn't just any mythical bird. Her bronze feathers shimmer with the wisdom of 17,000 years, and her wings, when spread, darken the sun like an eclipse. In the Shahnameh, Persia's epic book of kings, the Simurgh doesn't merely observe human folly, she intervenes, swooping into the life of Zal, the albino prince abandoned as a baby for his unnatural whiteness. Finding him wailing in a mountain nest, she doesn't just raise him as her own, she teaches him the language of medicine, the secrets of stars, and the art of ruling with both fierceness and mercy. When Zal returns to his people, he carries more than survival, he carries her imprint, a blend of avian instinct and divine insight that shapes him into a legendary king. Yet the Simurgh's role transcends mere foster parent. She's a living paradox, both guardian and oracle, her very existence a bridge between earth and the ineffable. In one haunting passage, she plucks a feather and gives it to Zal, instructing him to burn it if he ever needs her. Years later, when Zal's son Rostam lies near death, impaled by poisoned arrows, the smoke from that feather summons her once more. What happens next isn't just a rescue, it's a masterclass in symbolic healing. The Simurgh doesn't merely extract the arrows, she whispers to Rostam the cure hidden in the wound itself, teaching him that poison and remedy often spring from the same source. This moment echoes an ancient Persian truth. Wisdom isn't about avoiding suffering, but deciphering its hidden inscriptions. Then the story takes a mystical turn. In Sufi poetry, particularly Farid ad-Dinatar's Conference of the Birds, the Simurgh transforms from a literal creature to a metaphor for the divine. Here, 30 birds embark on a harrowing quest to find her, crossing 7 valleys of longing, love, and annihilation. When they finally reach her mountain, exhausted and stripped of illusions, they realize the punchline hidden in her name all along. Simurgh means 30 birds in Persian. The seekers and the sought are one a revelation that dissolves the boundary between worshipper and worshipped. Attar's allegory isn't just pretty mysticism. It's a radical dismantling of hierarchy, suggesting enlightenment isn't about reaching a distant throne but recognizing the sacred already nested within. Modern scholars trace eerie parallels between the Simurgh and other avian sages, the Egyptian Bennu, the Chinese Feng Huang, even the Greek Phoenix. But what sets her apart is her refusal to be pinned down. She's not just a cyclical symbol of rebirth. She's a teacher who demands active engagement. Persian miniature paintings often depict her with a human face amid her feathers, a visual nod to her role as mirror. When poets like Rumi invoke her, she becomes the voice that answers every seeker's cry with the same challenge. You already know the way, now brave the valleys. Perhaps that's why her myth endures. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and external saviors, the Simurgh's lesson feels almost subversive. Her mountain isn't a place you conquer, it's where you shed the illusion that you ever needed to climb at all. The earth trembles and splits open under the fiery gaze of Pele, Hawaii's goddess of volcanoes, whose rage burns as hot as the rivers of lava that carve her kingdom. But her power was never unchallenged. Her fiercest battles weren't against mortals, but against her own sister Namakeakahai, the goddess of the sea. Their rivalry wasn't just family drama, it was a primal clash of elements, a celestial war between fire and water that shaped the islands themselves. Legend says Pele fled from her homeland in the distant south, carrying a sacred digging stick to carve out a new domain. Everywhere she struck the earth, fire erupted, but Namaka, enraged by her sister's destructive path, pursued her with towering waves, drowning each new volcanic foothold. Their chase scorched and flooded its way across the Pacific, leaving shattered landforms in its wake, until Pele finally reached the Big Island's towering slopes of Mauna Loa. Here she plunged her stick deep into the earth, summoning eruptions so violent that Namaka's waves couldn't extinguish them. The sea goddess, forced to retreat, still lashes the coasts with storms, but Pele's fires now burn beyond her reach. Witnessing an eruption in Hawaii isn't just a geological event, it's a window into this divine struggle. When lava meets the ocean, hissing plumes of steam rise like the ghosts of their battles. The rocks themselves tell the story, jagged as lava, rough as Namaka's anger, and smooth Paho, flowing like Peel's hair when she's at peace. Ancient chants describe eruptions as Peel's dance, her way of reclaiming stolen lands or punishing those who disrespect her. In the 19th century, when missionaries tried to ban hula, locals whispered that Peel answered with the devastating eruption of 1823, burying villages under molten rock. Modern scientists might measure magma chambers and tectonic shifts, but for many Hawaiians, every shudder of the earth is Peel's will made manifest. Offerings of gin, red flowers, and ohelo berries still appear at crater rims left by those seeking her favor. Park rangers tell of tourists who pocket lava rocks as souvenirs, only to mail them back with desperate letters about the curse of bad luck that followed. Even Hollywood couldn't resist her legend films like Volcano and Mona borrow her ferocity, though they soften her edges. Yet Peel isn't just destruction. She's creation incarnate. Every eruption builds new land, layer by layer, expanding the islands she fought so hard to claim. Her fires fertilize the soil, making Hawaii a paradise of lush forests and vibrant blooms. To call her wrathful misses the point. Plea doesn't punish, she transforms, and in the flickering glow of Kilauea's caldera, you can almost hear her whisper, "What I take, I return tenfold, just not in ways you expect." Beneath the surface of what we see, whispered in the shadows of ancient texts, lies a terrifying idea. What if the gods we worship aren't divine at all, but prison wardens of a cosmic jail? This is the heart of Gnostic belief, where the world isn't created by a benevolent god, but by flawed, often malevolent beings called archons. These counterfeit deities, according to secret gospels like the Nag Hammadi texts, crafted the physical world as a trap, molding humans from clay and ignorance to keep our souls shackled to matter. The demiurge, their blind and arrogant leader, proclaims himself the one true God, unaware of the transcendent light beyond his grasp. And here's the twist: our very bodies, our desires, even the stars above us are part of the cage. This wasn't just philosophical speculation, it was a radical rebellion against mainstream religion. While early Christians bowed to a loving creator, Gnostics saw Yahweh not as a father, but as a tyrant, his commandments designed to keep humanity submissive. The serpent in Eden, to them, it was a liberator offering Adam and Eve the forbidden knowledge that would awaken them to their divine sparks. Salvation didn't come through obedience, but through gnosis, a secret knowing that the soul's true home lay beyond the fake heavens of the archons. Fast forward to today, and these ancient heresies have shape-shifted into modern conspiracy theories. The idea of hidden overlords controlling humanity echoes in claims about reptilian elites or the simulation theory, where our world is an artificial construct. Even the QAnon movement's obsession with breaking the illusion mirrors Gnostic escape fantasies. When conspiracy theorists speak of red pilling, they're unknowingly channeling the same desire to rip away the veil and expose the puppet masters. The archons might not be called by name, but their shadow lingers in every paranoid tweet about secret cabals ruling the world. Yet there's a crucial difference. The Gnostics sought transcendence through introspection and spiritual discipline, while modern conspiracy culture often thrives on rage and division. Where a Gnostic might meditate to awaken the divine within, a conspiracy theorist scrolls for truth bombs that only deepen their fear. The archons, ironically, might be winning, not by keeping us ignorant, but by convincing us that the only way out is to tear each other apart. Archaeology adds another layer to the mystery. The Nag Hammadi scrolls, discovered in 1945 in an Egyptian jar, were nearly lost to time, buried by Orthodox Christians who saw them as dangerous heresy. Their survival feels like a cosmic joke, a hidden message waiting millennia for the right moment to resurface. Today, as conspiracy theories spiral out of control, these texts challenge us to ask who benefits from our fear. Who gains when we mistake rage for enlightenment? The Gnostics warned us about false gods, but the most insidious archon might be the one whispering in our own ears, the part of us that wants to believe we're trapped, because it's easier than facing the terrifying freedom of being truly awake. Deep in the frozen lands of the Kalevala, where the wind howled secrets through the pines, stood the most coveted artifact in Finnish mythology, a device so powerful it could grind out endless abundance from nothing but thin air. The Sampo wasn't just a magical mill, it was destiny itself forged into iron, its gears woven by the gods and stolen by mortal hands. Its creation began with a promise and a trick. The smith god Ilmarinen, desperate to win the hand of the maiden Pohjola, vowed to craft something no one had ever seen, a machine that could churn out salt, grain, and gold with every turn of its handle. For 3 days and nights he hammered at the heart of a mountain, shaping enchantment into metal until the Sampo roared to life, its lid adorned with constellations, its foundation rooted in the earth's veins. But the Sampo's blessings came with a curse. Like all objects of boundless fortune, it bred greed and bloodshed. Lauhai, the witch queen of Pohjola, seized control of it, hoarding its wealth for her own frozen kingdom while the rest of Finland starved. This wasn't just theft, it was a cosmic imbalance, a tilting of fate's scales. So the heroes Väinämöinen and Lemminkainen sailed into the north, not as warriors but as thieves in the night, battling Lauhai's dark magic to reclaim what they saw as their birthright. The clash that followed wasn't just a physical struggle, it was a battle over destiny itself. As the Sampo shattered during the fight, its pieces scattered into the sea. Some say its lid became the heavens, its broken gears the stars, and its handle the anchor of the world. Scholars still debate what the Sampo truly represented. Was it a metaphor for Finland's harsh winters, where survival depended on the fragile balance of resources? Or was it a symbol of cosmic order, a reminder that no one can hoard destiny without consequence? The Kalevala's verses hint at both. When the heroes return home with only fragments of the Sampo, the land still prospers, not from endless gold, but from the resilience of its people. Perhaps the real magic wasn't in the mill's mechanisms, but in the lesson it left behind. Fortune isn't something you steal, but something you cultivate, even from the broken pieces fate leaves behind. Modern Finland still wrestles with the Sampo's legacy. Artists paint it as a gleaming engine of industry, while environmentalists see it as a warning, a world where endless extraction leads only to ruin. Even the name lingers in unexpected places. Tech startups and co-ops borrow the Sampo's imagery, chasing a different kind of abundance. The myth endures because it asks a question we're still trying to answer. Is destiny something we grind out of the universe, or something we build together from whatever the waves wash ashore? The story of Aura the Beautiful isn't just a tragic love tale. It's a cornerstone of Armenian identity, a myth where desire and defiance collide with the weight of a nation's pride. According to legend, Queen Semiramis of Assyria, a ruler as brilliant as she was ruthless, became obsessed with the legendary beauty of Aura, an Armenian king. She sent him gifts, promises, even threats, demanding he become her consort. But Aura refused, his loyalty pledged to his land and people. Enraged, Semiramis marched her armies into Armenia, waging war not for territory, but for possession of a man who'd scorned her. The battle was fierce, and though legends differ on whether Aura fell in combat or was secretly kidnapped, one truth remained: his death became a rallying cry. Some versions claim Semiramis kept his body in her chamber, whispering spells to resurrect him, while others say his people refused to surrender even his corpse, declaring his spirit lived on in the soil of Armenia itself. What makes this myth so potent isn't just its drama. It's how it mirrors Armenia's historical struggles. Sandwiched between empires, Armenia faced countless invasions from Assyria to Rome to the Ottomans. Aura's defiance became a metaphor for the country's resistance, his beauty symbolizing the cultural and spiritual richness invaders coveted but could never truly possess. Even the ambiguity of his fate speaks volumes. Whether he died in battle or in Semirama's grasp, his legacy couldn't be erased. This parallels Armenia's own survival, its language, its Christianity, its traditions persisting despite centuries of conquest. The myth also subverts typical power dynamics. Semiramis, often portrayed as a formidable conqueror in other traditions, is reduced here to a desperate figure, her might useless against Aura's unyielding spirit. Meanwhile, Aura's refusal to be objectified flips the script on masculine vulnerability. His beauty isn't passive, it's an act of resistance, a reminder that some things' dignity, identity, can't be seized by force. Modern Armenia still echoes this narrative. During the genocide of 1915, when Ottoman forces targeted Armenians, survivors spoke of Aura's story as solace proof that even in annihilation, their essence couldn't be extinguished. Today, his name graces poems, operas, and even street murals in Yerevan, a timeless emblem of what it means to endure. The lesson isn't just about one king's tragedy. It's about the unbreakable bond between a people and their land, and the quiet truth that some loves for home, for heritage, are worth more than life itself. High in the thin air of the Andes, where terraces carve mountains into emerald stairways and stone walls fit together with knife-edge precision, the Incas didn't just see agriculture, they saw the fingerprints of a god. Viracocha, the weeping creator deity, didn't simply shape the world. He designed it with geometric perfection, his blueprints etched into the very bones of the landscape. Unlike the chaotic explosions of creation in other myths, Viracocha's work was methodical, almost architectural. Emerging from the depths of Lake Titicaca after a primordial flood, he fashioned the sun, moon, and stars with measured strokes, then sculpted humanity from stone, breathing life into his carvings before walking among them to teach the arts of civilization. But his greatest masterpiece wasn't the heavens or even mankind. It was the invisible order underlying everything. The proof of this divine geometry lies in the Incan Empire's crowning achievement, their terrace farms. These weren't just practical solutions to steep slopes, they were living altars to Viracocha's precision. Each level followed the contour of the land with mathematical harmony, their curves echoing the sacred sect lines, invisible energy pathways radiating from Cusco, the empire's navel. The Incas built without mortar, their stones cut so exactly that not even a razor blade could slip between them. Modern engineers still marvel at how these walls withstand earthquakes, swaying and settling without collapse. The secret: the Incas didn't force the land to obey them. They listened to its whispers, fitting their designs to the rhythm of the earth itself, a practice they called yanantin, the union of complementary opposites. Viracocha's influence didn't stop at architecture. The sect system mapped not only irrigation channels but also the empire's spiritual calendar, aligning shrines and rituals with celestial events. Festivals like Inti Raymi, the sun celebration, weren't arbitrary. They were plotted along these invisible axes, turning the entire kingdom into a clockwork mechanism of worship. Even textiles wove his principles, their patterns encoding cosmological truths in threads. A quipu, the knotted cord system used for record-keeping, wasn't just an administrative tool. It was a tactile representation of Viracocha's ordered universe, where every knot held a place in the grand design. The cruel irony: Spanish conquistadors dismissed these feats as primitive, missing the genius in their obsession for gold. They tore down temples built on sacred ratios, paved over roads aligned with solstices, and imposed their own grid-like cities atop the Incan curvilinear harmony. Yet fragments endure. In remote villages, farmers still plant potatoes along ancestral terraces, following rhythms older than the conquest. Archaeologists using satellite imagery have rediscovered lost sect lines, their trajectories too precise to be coincidence. And perhaps that's the ultimate testament to Viracocha's vision. Even shattered, his designs still hum beneath the surface, waiting for those who know how to read the land's silent language. On the blood-soaked fields of ancient Ireland, where warriors clashed beneath storm-blackened skies, a lone crow would sometimes land, not to scavenge but to watch. The Morrigan wasn't just a goddess of war, she was war's living shadow, a shape-shifting prophetess whose cause spelled doom long before the first sword struck. Unlike other deities who blessed heroes or swayed battles, she did neither. She simply appeared sometimes as a raven, sometimes as a crimson-cloaked woman washing armor in the river, uttering prophecies so precise they felt less like predictions and more like verdicts. When she whispered to the hero Cu Chulainn that his enemies would fall like butter on a hot stone, it wasn't a boast, it was a fact already written in the entrails of the earth. Yet the Morrigan's power wasn't just in foreseeing death, it was in the chilling intimacy of her omens. In the Tain Bo Cuelnge, she doesn't deliver grand visions from a mountaintop. She meets warriors face to face, her voice cracking like a branch underfoot, her words curling into their ears like smoke. To the doomed, she might appear as a hag sharpening a spear, her whetstone screech mirroring the future screams of the fallen. To the victorious, she could be a lover, her embrace as fierce as the battle itself. This duality, lover and reaper, muse and mourner, made her terrifying. She didn't just announce fate, she wove herself into its fabric, her presence a thread pulled taut between the living and the dead. Modern feminists have reclaimed the Morrigan, not as a monstrous harbinger, but as a symbol of unapologetic female agency. Where patriarchal traditions often cast powerful women as witches or hags, the Morrigan owns her ferocity. She chooses when to appear, whom to bless, and whom to doom. Contemporary pagan circles honor her in rituals where women anoint shields with iron-rich soil, channeling her as a patron of boundaries and sovereignty. Artists reimagine her not as a passive oracle, but as a general, her cloak stitched with crow feathers, her hands stained with ink and ochre, writing history rather than reciting it. Archaeology hints at how deeply her cult once ran. At the Rathcrogan complex, linked to the Morrigan's legendary home, excavations reveal bird bones buried with weapons, offerings to the goddess who straddled the line between beast and divinity. Even the word Morrigan splits meanings. Some linguists tie it to Phantom Queen, others to Great Queen, a title that would later be sanitized into folklore's generic Fairy Queen. But the Morrigan was never genteel. She was the raw cry of the carrion bird, the blood scent on the wind, the unflinching truth that some choices like Cu Chulainn's refusal of her love carry consequences no hero can outrun. Her legacy thrives where you'd least expect it. In Belfast murals, her face glares beside slogans of resistance. In fantasy novels, she's the template for ruthless, complex warrior women who refuse to be tamed. And in quiet groves from Galway to New York, those who still whisper her name don't ask for mercy. They ask for clarity, for the courage to see the coming storm and stare into its eye, as unblinking as the crow on the battlefield waiting. In the shadowy alleys of 16th-century Prague, where whispers of pogroms and blood libels slithered like poison through the Jewish quarter, Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel faced a choice no leader should ever have to make: how far to go to protect his people. Desperate to shield his community from violent mobs, he turned not to swords or diplomacy, but to the most ancient of Jewish mystical traditions, the golem. According to the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, certain sages could animate lifeless matter by inscribing the divine name onto its form. Under cover of darkness, Loew and two assistants gathered clay from the banks of the Vieltova River, molding it into the shape of a man. With sacred incantations, they etched the word emet, truth, onto its forehead, awakening the creature with the breath of the ineffable. This wasn't just folklore. The Golem of Prague functioned as a proto-robot, obeying commands with unwavering precision. By day, it posed as Loew's mute servant, Joseph. By night, it patrolled the ghetto's gates, crushing anti-Semitic rioters in its fists or vanishing into mist to gather intelligence. But here's where the myth chills the bone. The golem had no conscience, no capacity to question. When ordered to defend, it couldn't distinguish between a murderer and a mischievous child. Some versions claim Lo eventually had to deactivate it after it went berserk, erasing the first letter of Emet to leave Met, meaning dead. Others say it still slumbers in the attic of Prague's old new synagogue, waiting for the next emergency. Fast forward to today, and the golem's legacy haunts our debates about artificial intelligence. Like Lo's creation, AI operates on exacting instructions without moral reasoning, a tool that can equally protect or destroy based on who wields it. Facial recognition algorithms trained to identify criminals have mislabeled innocent minorities as threats, echoing the golem's blind brutality. Autonomous drones programmed for precision strikes lack the empathy to weigh collateral damage. Even chatbots, when fed toxic data, regurgitate hate with the same mechanical indifference as the golem's fists. Yet the parallel runs deeper than cautionary tales. Jewish scholars point out that the golem wasn't inherently evil, it was amoral, a mirror reflecting its creator's intentions. This frames a vital question for our age. Can we, like Rabbi Lo, recognize when our creations need restraints? The myth suggests that true wisdom lies not in the power to animate, but in the humility to deactivate. In an era where tech giants race to build ever more advanced AI, few pause to ask who holds the eraser for their own modern Emet. Perhaps that's the golem's most enduring lesson, not how to bring something to life, but how and when to let it go. On the sweeping plains of the American Midwest, where the wind carries voices older than memory, the Lakota tell of a visitor who changed everything. The people were starving, their prayers unanswered when she appeared. A woman so radiant her white buckskin dress seemed woven from sunlight itself. At first, the hunters took her for a vision until she spoke with a voice that resonated in their bones. This was Tesson Y, White Buffalo Woman, and she carried something more precious than food. A sacred pipe, its red bowl carved from stone, its wooden stem adorned with 12 eagle feathers representing all flying creatures. Her instructions were precise. She filled the pipe with red willow bark tobacco, lit it with a breath that needed no flame, and demonstrated the ritual, lifting the stem to the sky for the Great Spirit, lowering it to the earth for Mother Earth, then pointing it in the 4 sacred directions. Smoke coiled like a living prayer, binding heaven and earth in a covenant never to be broken. This pipe is the heart of your people, she told them. When you smoke it, your words will reach Wakon Tanka, the great mystery. Then, as suddenly as she arrived, she transformed first into a black buffalo, then a red one, yellow, and finally, a white buffalo calf vanishing into the horizon. Where her feet last touched the earth, wild buffalo herds surged forth, ending the famine. To the Lakota, this was no mere legend. The Chanunpa, the sacred pipe, became the core of their spiritual life, used in ceremonies from birth to death, war to peace. Even today, tribal leaders bring it out during sun dances and vision quests, handling the pipe with rituals unchanged for generations. The bowl is never separated from the stem, symbolizing the union of male and female energies. The act of smoking isn't a vice but a sacrament, each puff carrying gratitude, sorrow, or hope directly to the divine. What's astonishing is how the prophecy tied to White Buffalo Woman endures. Many Lakota believe her return, marked by the birth of a rare white buffalo, signals a time of global healing. In 1994, a white calf named Miracle was born in Wisconsin, sparking pilgrimages from tribes across the continent. Subsequent white buffalo births, like Lightning Medicine Cloud in Texas or Spirit Mountain's Big Horn in Montana, reignited hopes for reconciliation between indigenous and settler cultures. Skeptics dismiss these as genetic anomalies, but for the Lakota, each one is a whisper from Tesson Y herself, a reminder that the pipe's promise still holds. Archaeology hints at how deep this reverence runs. Excavations of ancient Lakota sites reveal pipe fragments dating back centuries, their designs eerily similar to White Buffalo Woman's original gift. Modern craftsmen still quarry catlinite, the red pipestone sacred to the Lakota, at Minnesota's Pipestone National Monument, where tribal members maintain exclusive mining rights under an 1837 treaty. Carving a pipe here isn't just artistry, it's an act of continuity, linking hands across generations to the moment a radiant stranger stepped from the prairie and taught a people how to pray. The myth's power lies in its immediacy. Unlike distant deities on mountaintops, White Buffalo Woman walked among the people, her gift not a relic locked in a temple, but a living tool for everyday grace. In a world fracturing under division, her lesson feels urgent, that the sacred isn't found in grand gestures, but in shared breath, in smoke curling skyward from a humble bowl, in the stubborn belief that even in the harshest drought, something holy might emerge from the dust to lead us home. Long before Watson and Crick unraveled the double helix, the Greeks envisioned fate itself as a thread twisted, measured, and snipped by three sisters who held life's blueprint in their hands. Clotho, the spinner, drew out the thread from her distaff, her fingers humming with the promise of beginnings. Lachesis, the measurer, marked its length with the precision of a celestial surveyor, determining the contours of each destiny. And Atropos, the inevitable, wielded her shears with chilling finality, severing the strand at its appointed hour. But what if this wasn't just poetic symbolism? What if the Moirai's spindle was an uncanny metaphor for something far more modern, the triple helix of DNA itself, whispering its coded decrees long before science caught up? Consider the parallels. Like the Moirai, DNA operates in triads, three nucleotides forming a codon, the basic unit of genetic instruction. Clotho's spinning mirrors DNA replication, where strands unwind and rebuild with each cell division, weaving new life from old templates. Lachesis measuring echoes gene expression, the careful regulation of which traits activate and when. And Atropos shears, their apoptosis, the programmed cell death that sculpts fingers from webbed fetal hands or prunes aging cells to make way for renewal. Even the spindle's twist is eerily reminiscent of DNA's coiled structure, as if ancient storytellers glimpsed the spiraling ladder of life in their mind's eye. This isn't mere coincidence, it's a testament to the Greeks' intuitive grasp of life's mechanisms. Without microscopes, they sensed that destiny wasn't arbitrary but written in some invisible script. The Moirai didn't just represent chance, they embodied the idea of a predetermined code, immutable as genetic inheritance. When Oedipus' father tried to flee the prophecy that his son would kill him, his desperation mirrors modern parents grappling with hereditary illness, fighting a future already inscribed in their very cells. Yet the Moirai's genius lies in their flexibility. Unlike rigid genetic determinism, their threads allowed for tension. Pull too hard and the strand might snap prematurely. This aligns with epigenetics, the study of how environment and behavior can influence gene expression. The fate's threads weren't unbreakable. They could stretch, tangle, or fray under pressure, much like how trauma or nutrition can leave molecular marks on DNA, altering its destiny. Modern artists and scientists alike have seized this connection. Biologists speak of genetic scissors like CRISPR, humanity's attempt to play Atropos by editing life's code. Sci-fi writers reimagine the Moirai as AI overlords programming human genomes, while bioethicists warn of the hubris in spinning designer babies. The myth persists because it articulates a truth deeper than biology. That life is both coded and fragile, a tapestry where every stitch, every base pair holds the weight of 1,000 possible futures. Perhaps the most haunting twist is this: the Moirai weren't gods. They were older, primordial forces even Zeus couldn't command. In the same way, DNA predates us, outlasts us, and carries memories of ancestors we'll never meet. When Atropos cuts a thread, it's not cruelty, it's the necessary end of a pattern too vast for mortals to fully comprehend. And in that final snip, there's a strange comfort that every life, like every strand of DNA, is part of a grander weave, spinning onward long after our own thread runs out. The Jade Emperor's celestial court had never seen chaos like this before. A single monkey, a stone-born troublemaker named Sun Wukong, was tearing through the heavens, his staff whirling like a tornado of defiance. He wasn't just breaking rules, he was rewriting them, stealing the peaches of immortality from the god's own orchard, guzzling the elixirs of eternal life, and scrawling his name in the book of death as if destiny itself were a joke. But this wasn't just rebellion for rebellion's sake. Sun Wukong's rampage exposed the fault lines between two cosmic worldviews, Taoist harmony and Buddhist discipline clashing like symbols in the halls of heaven. Taoism, with its emphasis on natural flow and spontaneous action, practically birthed Sun Wukong's character. His very existence defied categorization, born from a rock nourished by the elements. He was the embodiment of Wu Wei, the Taoist principle of effortless action. When he mastered the 72 earthly transformations or somersaulted clouds to travel miles in a blink, it wasn't mere magic, it was the universe bending to his unrestrained spirit. The Taoist immortals who first taught him secret arts saw his potential but underestimated his refusal to kneel. Heaven's rigid hierarchy, with its endless paperwork and celestial bureaucracy, was anathema to everything Sun Wukong represented. His infamous title, Great Sage Equal to Heaven, wasn't just arrogance, it was a Taoist manifesto, declaring that even a monkey could stand eye to eye with the gods if he embraced his true nature. But then Buddhism entered the fray, personified by the Buddha himself. When Sun Wukong, convinced he could leap clear of the Buddha's palm, somersaulted for days only to find himself still trapped beneath 5 fingers, the message was clear. Raw power without wisdom was a cage. The Buddha's mountain prison and the golden headband that later tightened around Sun Wukong's skull weren't just punishments, they were spiritual tools forcing the monkey to confront his own ego. Here, the journey to the West narrative pivots from Taoist celebration to Buddhist discipline. Sun Wukong's eventual redemption, protecting the monk Xuanzang on his pilgrimage, wasn't about suppressing his wildness but channeling it. Every demon he vanquished on the road to India mirrored an inner demon subdued, his staff no longer a weapon of chaos but an instrument of liberation. The tensions between these philosophies still resonate today. Modern Taoist practitioners might admire Sun Wukong's early rebellion as the ultimate expression of authenticity, while Buddhists could point to his later journey as proof that enlightenment requires structure. Even the Monkey King's signature weapon, the Rui Jingu Bang, a staff that could grow to pierce the heavens or shrink to a needle, becomes a metaphor for this duality. It's as limitless as Taoist freedom, yet as precise as Buddhist focus, just as the myth itself balances anarchy and order. Perhaps that's why Sun Wukong endures. He's not just a character, he's a cultural conversation, a reminder that the path to wisdom isn't a straight line but a wild, spiraling dance between breaking the rules and learning why they existed in the first place. And somewhere between the ink of ancient scrolls and the pixels of modern adaptations, the Monkey King still grins, his gold-flecked eyes daring us to ask, which is mightier, the heavens that bind or the spirit that refuses to be tamed? The battlefield was never silent after the clash of steel, not when the Valkyries descended. These Norse choosers of the slain didn't merely watch from the shadows, they rode through the carnage on their spectral steeds, their armor gleaming like ice under a winter moon. Their task wasn't random selection but something far more deliberate, a divine triage where only the most ferocious, the most gloriously unyielding warriors earned a seat in Valhalla. Picture it, a warrior, his axe shattered, his shield splintered, still snarling defiance as the life bleeds from his wounds. That's when she'd appear, a Valkyrie, her face half hidden by a winged helm, her voice cutting through the din like a cold wind. Rise, she'd command, and the fallen would find himself standing, his wounds gone, his spirit alight with the promise of eternal feasting and battle beside Odin himself. But the Valkyrie's choices weren't just about brute strength. Norse sagas reveal a nuanced code of honor. In the Grimnismal, Odin lists the traits he values: courage, yes, but also loyalty, cunning, and even poetic skill. A warrior who died with a laugh on his lips or a well-turned verse might catch a Valkyrie's eye as surely as one who slew a dozen foes. Take the legendary Starkad, a warrior poet whose deeds were so storied that multiple Valkyries reportedly fought over his soul. This wasn't mindless bloodlust, it was a cosmic curation, assembling an army of the dead worthy of Ragnarok's final stand. Now, contrast this myth with the growing archaeological evidence of real shield maidens, women buried with swords, axes, and battle scars. In Birka, Sweden, a 10th century grave once assumed to hold a male chieftain yielded a DNA surprise. The skeleton was female, surrounded by weapons, game pieces a sign of strategic thinking, and even the remains of 2 horses. Similar finds in Norway and Denmark suggest women didn't just inspire battles, they fought in them. Suddenly, the Valkyries take on new dimensions. Were they reflections of these historical warrior women, elevated to divine status? Or did the existence of shield maidens make the idea of female choosers of the slain feel less fantastical to the Vikings? The Valkyries' duality, both nurturers and reapers, adds another layer. In some poems they serve mead in Valhalla, in others they weave the fates of men on looms strung with intestines. This mirrors the complex roles of Norse women, who are brewers, weavers, and sometimes warlords. The Valkyrie Brynhilda, who defies Odin's orders to protect a hero she loves, embodies this tension between duty and desire, a theme echoed in sagas of mortal women like Freydis Eiriksdottir, who reportedly fought off attackers while pregnant. Today's scholars debate whether Valkyries were originally death spirits later romanticized, or if they always straddled the line between beauty and brutality. What's undeniable is their lasting grip on our imagination. From Wagner's operatic renditions to Marvel's fierce Brunhilde, they remain symbols of agency in a world where fate and free will collide. And perhaps that's their true power, not just to choose warriors, but to remind us that glory isn't given. It's seized in this life or the next. The scribe's reed pen hovered over the papyrus, dripping ink as precious as gold. This was no ordinary document, it was a cheat sheet for the afterlife, a collection of spells so powerful they could bend the rules of the underworld itself. Known today as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, these texts weren't just religious scripture, they were a tactical guide for wealthy elites determined to game the system of eternity. Imagine a world where your fate in the afterlife wasn't determined by virtue alone, but by how well you could memorize or afford the right incantations to sweet-talk the gods. Take spell 125, the most infamous of them all, the Declaration of Innocence. This was the ultimate moral loophole. Before the scales of Mat, where the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of truth, the dead would recite 42 affirmations denying every sin imaginable. I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not caused tears. On the surface, it sounds like a solemn oath, but here's the catch. The spells guaranteed the speaker wouldn't stumble over their words, even if they'd spent their life embezzling grain taxes or ordering enemies drowned in the Nile. Wealthy Egyptians commissioned lavish copies of the Book of the Dead, crammed with customized spells to smooth their path through the Duat. Some even had placeholder blanks, insert name here, so the same scroll could be reused for the whole family, like a royal subscription to salvation. And then there were the visual hacks. Scenes painted on tomb walls showed the deceased plowing celestial fields or feasting with Osiris, not as hopeful depictions, but as magical insurance. The Egyptians believed images held power. If you painted yourself victorious in the afterlife, you became victorious. Elite tombs included shabti figurines, tiny servant statues inscribed with spell 6. If I'm called to dig canals in the afterlife, say I'll do it for me. It was outsourcing eternity's manual labor, ensuring the rich wouldn't lift a finger even in death. But the most revealing detail lies in the evolution of these texts. Early versions, like the pyramid texts, were reserved for pharaohs' exclusive VIP passes to immortality. Over centuries, they trickled down to nobles, then wealthy merchants, becoming the ancient equivalent of a pay-to-win afterlife DLC. Archaeologists have found Book of the Dead scrolls with corrections in the margins, proof that scribes and clients were fine-tuning the magic for maximum efficacy. Yet for all their cunning, these spells couldn't mask a haunting truth. The very existence of such elaborate hacks suggests a deep anxiety that no amount of gilded tombs or recited verses could fully silence the fear of judgment. Maybe that's why the Book of the Dead endures. It's not just a relic of superstition, it's a mirror. Even now, don't we all hope there's a spell, a prayer, a loophole that might let us slip past the scales when our own time comes? The ancient Egyptians just had the audacity to write it down. Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, where mist curls around ancient peaks like the breath of the earth itself, the Cherokee tell of a creature so powerful its mere glance could bring death, the Octina. This wasn't just any serpent, it was a monstrous fusion of snake and deer, its body coiled with iridescent scales, its forehead crowned by a single, shimmering crystal horn. Legends say this crystal pulsed with otherworldly light, capable of revealing hidden truths or striking down those who dared to seek its power without reverence. But the Octina's gift came at a price. To gaze directly into its crystal meant madness or doom, and its venom could rot the land itself, leaving blighted patches where nothing grew for generations. The origins of the Octina trace back to a time when the world was still shaping itself. Some stories say it was born from the jealousy of the sun, sent to punish the Cherokee for a slight they never intended. Others claim it was once a great warrior, transformed into a monster by greed or arrogance, a cautionary tale about the dangers of reaching too far. But the most haunting accounts tie the Octina to specific, sacred sites scattered across the Appalachians. One such place is Niquosi Mound in North Carolina, an ancient earthen structure said to be the Octina's prison. Elders warned that disturbing the mound would wake the serpent, unleashing its curse upon the land. Even today, some whisper that the crystal from its horn lies buried there, waiting for the day when arrogance outweighs wisdom. What makes the Octina myth so gripping isn't just its terror, it's the way it intertwines with the very landscape. The serpent's supposed lairs often coincide with geological oddities. Caves lined with quartz crystals, mountain springs with eerie mineral deposits, even sites where strange lights flicker in the fog. Modern geologists note that these locations frequently sit atop fault lines or rare gemstone veins, suggesting the Cherokee may have used the Octina to explain phenomena they observed but didn't yet understand scientifically. The blighted lands where the serpent's venom fell, possibly areas with toxic soil or gas leaks, marked as taboo to protect the people from very real dangers. The Octina's legacy lingers in ways both subtle and stark. Appalachian folk magic still references its crystal as a source of divination, though seekers are warned to approach with offerings and humility. Even the term Octina has seeped into local dialects, sometimes used to describe something impossibly vast or ancient. And in Cherokee communities today, the serpent remains a potent symbol not just of danger but of balance. Its curse isn't mindless destruction. It's a reminder that some knowledge, some power, demands respect too deep for recklessness. To ignore that lesson is to risk waking something far older and far darker than we can comprehend. Enlil, the Mesopotamian god of wind and storms, didn't just command the skies, he held the fate of entire civilizations in the palm of his hand. To the Sumerians, he wasn't merely a force of nature, he was the divine bureaucrat, the celestial king whose decrees could elevate a city to glory or reduce it to dust with a single breath. Imagine the terror of waking to a sandstorm so fierce it scoured the walls of Urber, or the dread of a drought so prolonged it turned the Euphrates into a cracked wasteland. These weren't natural disasters to the ancient Mesopotamians. They were Enlil's verdicts delivered without trial or explanation. one of the most chilling examples lies in the myth of the Great Flood. While later cultures would attribute similar deluges to divine wrath or cosmic accidents, the Sumerian version is starkly bureaucratic. Enlil, annoyed by the noise of humanity, convenes a divine council and signs off on humanity's obliteration as casually as a king stamping a tax decree. Only the god Enki, defying Enlil's orders, whispers the plan to build an ark to the righteous man Ziusudra. The flood itself is described not as a chaotic surge, but as a meticulously executed divine order, a celestial eviction notice served by hurricane winds and unrelenting rain. But Enlil's power wasn't just destructive. His favor could transform mud brick villages into thriving metropolises overnight. The city of Nippur, his cult center, became the spiritual heart of Sumer not through military might but because it was the place where Enlil's word was spoken. Kingship itself was believed to flow from his divine mandate. When a ruler like Sargon of Akkad rose to power, his inscriptions didn't boast of conquests alone. They emphasized Enlil's approval, as if the god's breath had literally filled his sails. Even the famed Code of Ur-Nammu, one of history's earliest legal systems, claimed its authority from Enlil's will, framing justice as an extension of divine wind. Archaeology reveals how deeply this belief shaped daily life. Excavated tablets from the 3rd dynasty of Ur elaborate rituals to calm Enlil's heart, including offerings of rare woods and libations poured into sacred pits designed to mimic the god's abode. The positioning of temples wasn't arbitrary, their doors aligned with prevailing winds, turning architecture into a literal prayer for favor. And here's the twist: Enlil's unpredictability wasn't seen as cruelty, but as a cosmic lesson in humility. The Sumerians accepted that their fortunes could shift like desert sands, not because their god was capricious, but because mortals were meant to navigate his whims with ingenuity and reverence. The legacy of Enlil's decrees lingers in the unlikeliest places. Modern scholars note parallels between his role and contemporary ideas of divine right, or even the caprices of climate change, forces beyond human control that nonetheless demand response. His myth serves as a reminder that power, whether divine or natural, has always been something to petition, outwit, or endure, but never to take for granted. In a world where storms still erase cities and fortunes still rise and fall on unseen currents, Enlil's wind whispers an ancient warning. The line between destiny and disaster is as thin as a reed in the wind. The year was 1519 when Spanish ships first appeared off the coast of Mexico. But in the eyes of the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma, these weren't just foreign invaders. They were the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, a cosmic reckoning written in the stars long before the first conquistador drew breath. For generations, Aztec priests had foretold the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who'd vanished centuries earlier, vowing to come back from the east to reclaim his kingdom. When Hernán Cortés arrived in that very year, bearing pale skin and strange weapons, draped in gleaming armor that caught the light like scales, Moctezuma hesitated. What if this wasn't an enemy but a deity? The question would cost him everything. This version of events that the Aztecs willingly surrendered their empire because they mistook Cortés for a god has been repeated for centuries. But dig deeper and the cracks in the story widen. Spanish chroniclers like Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who accompanied Cortés, had every reason to paint the conquest as divinely ordained. Framing Moctezuma's confusion as a religious blunder justified the violence that followed. If the emperor himself believed the Spaniards were gods, then resistance wasn't just futile, it was sacrilege. But Aztec sources, like the Florentine Codex compiled after the conquest, tell a different tale. Moctezuma wasn't a naive fool trembling before white-skinned deities. He was a shrewd ruler playing a dangerous game, sending envoys with gifts to gauge these strangers' intentions while buying time to mobilize his forces. The myth of Quetzalcoatl's return was far more complex than the Spanish let on. the original Quetzalcoatl wasn't some pale, bearded messiah. He was a Toltec king priest, Topiltzin Quetzalcoatl, who ruled the city of Chilas centuries before the Aztecs rose to power. His story was one of exile, not resurrection driven out by political rivals. He'd sailed east on a raft of serpents, promising to return someday. The Aztecs, who saw themselves as heirs to Toltec glory, absorbed this legend into their own cosmology. But here's the twist: their Quetzalcoatl wasn't a single entity. He was a fusion of divine forces, wind, wisdom, the morning star embodied in rituals where priests donned his plumed regalia. The idea that he'd physically return in human form was a Spanish invention, a convenient distortion to explain their sudden dominance. Modern scholars have uncovered even more damning evidence. The pale god narrative collapses when you examine Aztec art. Murals and codices depict Quetzalcoatl with dark skin, often adorned in turquoise and jade, his iconic feathered headdress symbolizing the union of earth and sky. More tellingly, Moctezuma's own actions betray no blind devotion. He initially refused to meet Cortés, sending intermediaries instead, a strategic move, not the groveling of a starstruck acolyte. Even the famous Omen years leading up to Cortés's arrival, floating temples seen in lakes, comets streaking the night sky were likely retrospective additions, woven into the story after the fact to make the conquest feel inevitable. The real tragedy isn't that Moctezuma fell for a divine ruse, it's that this myth was weaponized to erase Aztec agency. By framing their defeat as a mystical misunderstanding, the Spanish painted themselves as Destiny's chosen instruments, rather than ruthless opportunists exploiting political divisions. The Aztec Empire was already fracturing under its own weight, with subject states like the Tlaxcalans eager to ally with Cortés against their oppressors. The truth is messier, darker, and far more human. A civilization toppled not by prophecy, but by ambition, steel, and the brutal arithmetic of power. Yet fragments of the real Quetzalcoatl endure. In modern Mexico, his image adorns murals and protest banners, reclaimed as a symbol of resistance. Indigenous activists point to the myth's distortion as proof of colonialism's psychological warfare, how stories can be stolen, reshaped, and turned against their own people. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson here. History isn't written by the gods. It's written by the victors until someone digs deeper and finds the feathers beneath the blood. The Kali Yuga, Hinduism's final and darkest age, was never meant to be subtle. Ancient scriptures like the Puranas described it in apocalyptic detail. Rulers would become thieves, families would fracture, the earth would grow barren, and humanity would chase hollow pleasures while virtue withered like a plucked flower. But here's what most translations miss: this wasn't just doom-mongering. It was a meticulously coded warning about the cyclical nature of time itself, one that eerily mirrors our modern anxieties. Take the Vishnu Purana's predictions. It claims that in Kali Yuga, wealth alone will confer rank, a line that stings in an era of billionaire worship and influencer culture. It foretells shorter lifespans not just from war or famine, but from stress and overindulgence, a nod to today's crises of burnout and processed food. Most chilling, the prophecy that false doctrines would spread like wildfire, a premonition of disinformation algorithms and conspiracy theories thriving in digital echo chambers. Even the Bhagavata Purana's warning that humans would eat without blessing their food feels uncomfortably close to our distracted, fast food existence. Yet Kali Yuga's genius lies in its duality. Unlike linear apocalypses, it's not an endpoint, it's a phase in a vast, repeating cycle. The Mahabharata hints that every degenerate age contains seeds of renewal. The same texts predicting societal collapse also describe rare beings, the Mahapurushas, who emerge to anchor goodness even in chaos. Sound familiar? It's the same archetype as dystopian heroes like Mad Max or Katniss Everdeen, figures who resist decay not through brute force, but by awakening the dormant conscience of others. Modern Hindus debate where we are in the timeline. Puranic math suggests Kali Yuga began around 3100 BCE and will last 432,000 years. Yes, you read that right. But some reformers, like Sri Aurobindo, argued these ages are metaphorical, aligning with human consciousness rather than cosmic calendars. Meanwhile, environmentalists point to the Kali Yuga's prediction of ecological ruin, rivers poisoned, forests razed, as proof that ancient seers glimpsed the consequences of unchecked greed. The twist: Kali Yuga's worst prophecies come with a paradoxical hope. Its very darkness is said to accelerate spiritual growth, forcing humility upon a prideful species. In a world obsessed with disruption, maybe the most radical act is remembering cycles older than capitalism, older than empires, the ones that whisper, "This too shall rot, and from that rot something unexpected will rise." When Excalibur first emerged from the water, not thrust up from the depths but offered on the still surface like a gift, it wasn't just a sword being handed over. It was destiny itself rising to meet Arthur's grasp. The Lady of the Lake, so often reduced to a mystical prop in Arthurian legend, wasn't merely a watery enchantress. She was the last echo of something far older, a Celtic water deity in Christianized garb, her origins rippling back to pre-Roman Britain. Before medieval poets draped her in silks and courtly mystery, she was likely a manifestation of Coventina or Sulis, goddesses worshipped at sacred springs where weapons were cast as offerings. Think of the dozens of Iron Age swords dredged from rivers like the Thames, blades tossed not as trash, but as sacrifices to forces that governed life and death. The lady's act of presenting Excalibur mirrors these rituals in reverse. Instead of humans surrendering arms to the water's power, the water surrenders power to a human. But here's the twist: by the sword's return to the lake at Arthur's fall, the circle closes. The gift is reclaimed, reinforcing the Celtic belief that no mortal truly owns what the gods lend. Excalibur's journey from lake to king and back to lake isn't just a plot device. It's a metaphor for how destiny loops rather than ends. The Welsh tale Culhwch and Olwen hints at this. Arthur's sword, called Caladfwlch there, is pulled from a stone but later lost in battle, suggesting its power was always on loan. Medieval romances softened this into a single transfer, but the older undercurrent remains: sovereignty, like water, cannot be held. It flows through hands, never settling. Modern archaeology underscores this. At Llyn Cerrig Bach in Wales, a trove of ritual objects, swords, cauldrons, even slave chains, was found in a lake, proof that these waters were seen as thresholds between worlds. The lady's dwelling isn't a fairy tale setting, it's a liminal space where the rules of men dissolve. When Arthur receives Excalibur, he's not just getting a weapon. He's inheriting a pact with forces older than kingdoms, a pact that demands eventual repayment. The most haunting interpretation lies in the timing of Excalibur's return. As Arthur lies dying, he doesn't command Bedivere to keep the sword. He orders it back to the source, acknowledging that his reign was never truly his. In Celtic cosmology, this isn't defeat, it's balance. The lady's hand rising to catch the blade isn't reclaiming a prize, it's accepting a debt discharged. The water that gave takes, and in that exchange the myth whispers a truth we still feel. No empire, no matter how golden, outlasts the tides that bore it. Even now, the lady's legacy surfaces in unexpected ways. In Cornwall's Dosmery Pool, locals swear the lake's sudden midnight ripples are Excalibur's spirit stirring. Environmentalists invoke her as a guardian of threatened waters, framing pollution as a violation of ancient pacts. She endures because she was never just a character. She's the memory of a time when rivers were alive, and destiny wasn't written in stars, it pooled in dark water, waiting for the right hand to ripple its surface. Yorishima Taro never expected the turtle to talk. The young fisherman had freed it from torment by village boys, only to watch it bob in the shallows, its beak parting with words more ancient than his grandmother's stories. "Come with me," it rasped. "Ryugu-jo, the dragon palace, awaits you beneath the waves." What followed wasn't just a dive, it was a descent into a realm where time itself unraveled. The palace's coral towers pulsed with bioluminescent light, its halls lined with fish-scaled attendants who moved like shadows underwater. Days blurred into feasts and dances, the moon jellyfish chandeliers casting blue glow over a world untouched by decay. Yet when Taro begged to return home, clutching only a mysterious lacquered box as farewell gift, the turtle's warning held eerie weight. Do not open this, no matter how heavy your heart grows. The shock of his return is where the myth twists into something darker. His village had vanished, replaced by Chinese letter faces who stared blankly at his archaic speech. The family shrine bore names carved centuries past. In that gut-wrenching moment, Taro tore open the box not out of greed but desperation. A wisp of smoke curled out, wrapping around his body like a shroud. His skin withered, his hair bleached white, and in seconds he crumbled to dust. This wasn't just magic, it was one of humanity's earliest tales of relativistic time dilation, predating Einstein by over 1,000 years. Modern physicists recognize the bones of a cosmic truth here. The Dragon Palace's timeless luxury mirrors theories where gravity or velocity warp time. Think of astronauts aging slower on the ISS. But the myth digs deeper. Taro's tragedy isn't just about losing years, it's about the irreversible cost of straddling two temporal realities, the box. A perfect metaphor for entropy, its released smoke symbolizing the accelerated decay of a life displaced from its rightful timeline. Cultural echoes of this paradox ripple globally. Ireland's Oisin returns from Tir na an Og to find his people dust, his touch aging him upon dismounting his fairy steed. Rip Van Winkle wakes to a world that forgot him. Even sci-fi tropes like interstellar travel's time debt owe a debt to Yoroshima's sorrow. What makes the Japanese version unique is its emotional precision. Unlike Western tales framing time slips as punishment for curiosity, Taro's undoing stems from homesickness, a universal ache no science can soothe. Recent oceanography adds a chilling layer. Ryugu-jo's description, shimmering walls, slow-moving inhabitants, aligns oddly with the behavior of deep-sea creatures in high-pressure zones where life operates at a glacial pace. Could early divers have witnessed bioluminescent ecosystems and spun them into legends of altered time? Or perhaps the myth encodes warnings about the ocean's timeless abyss, where ships and souls alike vanish without trace. The tale's true lesson lingers like tidewater in sand. Time isn't just a measure, it's the fabric of belonging. Taro didn't lose his life to magic, he lost it to the cruel math of existence, that every choice, even kindness to a turtle, can exile you from the world you know. And in an age of cryogenics and Mars colonization fantasies, that's the whisper we still strain to hear, that some doors once opened can never be stepped through twice. The wind howls across the frozen north, carrying whispers of the end, not with fire or flood, but with an endless winter that chokes the world in silence. Fimbulwinter, the great and terrible frost, arrives first in the Norse prophecy of Ragnarök. Not just a season, but 3 winters back-to-back with no summer in between, the cold so relentless it gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil itself. Wolves, grown gaunt and desperate, swallow the sun and moon, plunging the world into eternal night. Earthquakes shake the foundations of Asgard as the wolf Fenrir snaps his chains, and the great serpent Jörmungandr rises from the sea, its venom poisoning the very sky. This isn't just destruction, it's a dismantling of cosmic order, where even the gods, for all their power, march toward their doom with grim certainty. Yet Marvel's flashy Hollywood version of Ragnarök, with Thor's hammer shattered and Asgard exploding in a blaze of CGI, misses the most haunting truth buried in the original Eddas. The Norse apocalypse wasn't a one-way street to oblivion. After the bloodshed, after the gods and giants lie dead in the ashes, the earth rises anew. The surviving Edda verses describe a world reborn, lush and green, where a handful of gods, including Thor's sons, inherit the ruins. The sun, swallowed by the wolf's girl, is reborn from the belly of its devourer, its light trembling over a fresh beginning. This cyclical rebirth, absent from Marvel's linear showdown, is what makes Ragnarök uniquely Norse. It's not about good versus evil, but about the inevitability of collapse and renewal, like a forest fire clearing the way for new growth. Dig deeper and the differences grow starker. In the Eddas, Loki isn't just a mischievous trickster, he's the architect of chaos, leading an army of the dead against the gods. Odin, wise and weary, knows his fate is to be devoured by Fenrir, yet prepares anyway, gathering slain warriors in Valhalla for a battle they cannot win. There's no last-minute reprieve, no deus ex machina. The tragedy is baked into the prophecy, making their courage fighting despite knowing the outcome all the more poignant. Marvel's Thor eventually triumphs, the Odin of myth does not. But here's where the myths hold a mirror to our modern anxieties. Fimbulwinter's unending cold feels uncomfortably familiar in an age of climate crisis, where glaciers melt not from fire but from human hands. The wolves swallowing the sun, a poetic stand-in for the fear of cosmic indifference that nature, in the end, will consume us all. Yet the Norse didn't despair. Their myths insisted that even after the worst winter, spring would come again. The lesson wasn't to dread the end, but to meet it with defiance, knowing that destruction is just another kind of seed. Perhaps that's why these stories endure. They don't offer escapism, they offer endurance. When Vikings carved runes about Ragnarök onto amulets or shield grips, they weren't courting doom. They were reminding themselves that even the gods face cycles of loss and renewal, and if the gods could stare down their twilight unflinching, so could they. In a world where our own Fimbulwinters, pandemics, wars, ecological collapse loom large, the Old Norse answer lingers like a whisper in the wind. This is not the first end, nor will it be the last. The real courage lies in planting seeds in the shadow of the wolves. The night sky over Bethlehem wasn't just a backdrop for the Magi's journey, it was the spark that set their destiny in motion. That mysterious star guiding 3 wise men from the east has been debated for centuries. Was it a divine beacon, or could astronomy explain its sudden brilliance? The Gospel of Matthew offers scant details, just a star rising in the east, halting over the place where the child lay. But ancient astronomers and modern scientists alike have scoured the heavens for clues. One leading theory points to a rare planetary conjunction. In the year 7 BC, Jupiter and Saturn aligned in the constellation Pisces, an event so striking it would have shone brighter than any other celestial body. For Babylonian astrologers who meticulously tracked planetary movements, this would have signaled something extraordinary. Jupiter symbolized kingship, Saturn was linked to the Jews, and Pisces represented the region of Judea. Put together, it's as if the sky itself spelled out, a king is born in Israel. Then there's the comet hypothesis. Chinese astronomers recorded a broom star in 5 BC, likely Halley's Comet or another celestial visitor, its tail sweeping across the darkness like a cosmic finger pointing westward. Could this have been the Magi's sign? Comets were universally feared as omens of upheaval, often tied to the rise or fall of rulers. But the Bible's description clashes slightly. The star didn't streak, it led, appearing and disappearing at key moments. Some scholars propose a nova, a star exploding in a sudden burst of light visible for months. The trouble, no known nova matches the timeline. What's fascinating isn't just the scientific debate, it's the tension between fate and choice woven into the Magi's story. These weren't passive observers, they were scholars who decided to follow the sign. In a world where astrology dictated everything from harvests to coronations, their journey reflects a delicate dance between celestial certainty and human agency. The star might have set their course, but each step crossing deserts, outwitting Herod, interpreting dreams, was an act of free will. Early church fathers like Augustine wrestled with this paradox, arguing the star didn't compel the Magi but invited them. The gifts they carried deepen the mystery: gold for kingship, frankincense for divinity, myrrh for mortality, each one a prophecy wrapped in an offering. Did they understand the full weight of what they brought? The Magi vanish from Scripture after presenting them, leaving us to wonder, were they mere instruments of destiny, or did their choices somehow shape the story they traveled so far to witness? Modern believers and skeptics alike can agree on one thing: whether the star was miracle or meteor, the Magi's journey reminds us that sometimes the heavens nudge us toward truths we'd never find by staying home. At the crossroads of human choice and divine will stands Eshu, the Yoruba trickster god who doesn't just observe destiny, he tangles it. Unlike other deities who deliver clear judgments or grand prophecies, Eshu thrives in ambiguity. Picture a traveler coming to a fork in the road, weighing two paths. Eshu might appear as a grinning old man offering a riddle instead of directions. His test isn't about right or wrong answers, it's about exposing the illusions of certainty. When a farmer prays for rain, Eshu could answer by drowning the crops. When a king demands obedience, Eshu might crown a beggar instead. His mischief isn't random cruelty, it's a cosmic corrective, reminding mortals that fate isn't a straight line but a maze of shifting possibilities. This trickster's domain is the crossroads, both literal and metaphorical. In Yoruba tradition, Eshu's shrines sit where paths intersect, marked by laterite stones smeared with palm oil. Offerings left there aren't bribes for favor but acknowledgments of life's unpredictability. The blues musicians of the American South, descendants of enslaved Yoruba people, unknowingly carried this symbolism into their music. Robert Johnson's legendary tale of selling his soul at a Mississippi crossroads mirrors Eshu's mythology, a moment where choices collapse into a single, irreversible decision. Johnson's guitar licks, raw and syncopated, echo the dissonance Eshu thrives on. Both the god and the bluesman understand true transformation happens in liminal spaces where certainty fractures and reinvention begins. Eshu's trickery reveals a profound truth about the nature of destiny. Where Greek fates weave unbreakable threads and Norse Norns carve immutable runes, Eshu insists on improvisation. A Yoruba proverb says, "The world is a marketplace, it is open to all." Eshu ensures no one monopoly on meaning or outcome. His chaos isn't destructive, it's generative. When he swaps the labels on two identical parts to provoke a village feud, he's not just causing trouble, he's forcing people to question their assumptions. Similarly, in the blues, sorrow bends into art, oppression into rhythm. The crossroads isn't just where deals are made, it's where suffering transmutes into something luminous. Modern psychology calls this cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt when plans shatter. Eshu embodies this principle long before laboratories named it. A student fails an exam only to discover their true passion lies elsewhere. A broken heart leads to unexpected creativity. These aren't consolations, they're Eshu's fingerprints. Even his visual symbolism, often depicted with contrasting red and black to represent duality, mirrors the blues' tension between despair and resilience. Eshu's lesson isn't that life is unfair, but that its fairness is more complex than we imagine. The next time you stand at a crossroads paralyzed by choices, remember, the trickster's laughter isn't mockery. It's an invitation to dance with the unexpected. Ku Chulainn wasn't just a warrior, he was a force of nature bound by invisible chains. From the moment he earned his name as a boy, slaying the Hound of Kulan with a single throw of his spear, his life became a tapestry of glory and grim inevitability. But what truly defined him wasn't his battle frenzy or superhuman strength. It was his jays, a set of sacred taboos woven into his destiny like tripwires waiting to be sprung. These weren't mere rules, they were cosmic contracts, violations of which would unravel his fate. One Jays forbade him from eating dog meat, a cruel irony given his namesake. Another prohibited him from refusing hospitality, especially from a woman. On the surface, these might seem arbitrary, but they were deeply tied to Celtic concepts of honor and balance. To break a Jays wasn't just disobedience, it was a rupture in the natural order, inviting disaster. Compare this to Greek heroes like Achilles, whose flaws were internal pride, wrath, hubris. Cuchulain's downfall came from external traps, a web of obligations he couldn't navigate without snaring himself. The tragedy unfolds with grinding inevitability. During his final battle, a group of sorceresses, some versions say they're disguised as ordinary women, offer him roasted dog meat, refuse, and he breaks his Jays against denying hospitality. And he violates the taboo against eating his namesake's flesh. Either choice is doom. He eats the meat, and from that moment his strength wanes, his luck turns, and the Morrigan's prophecies close in like a noose. Where Greek heroes like Oedipus or Ajax are brought low by their own blind spots, Cuchulain's end feels like a rigged game. His Jays aren't flaws, they're landmines planted by fate. Yet there's a chilling beauty to this. The Celts saw destiny not as a straight path, but as a labyrinth of interwoven oaths and debts. Even the mightiest hero couldn't outmaneuver the fine print of his own legend. Modern echoes of the Jays linger in stories where characters are doomed by their own codes. Think of Batman's refusal to kill, or the operative in Serenity wrestling with his own "no prisoners" rule. But Cuchulain's tale cuts deeper. His Jays weren't choices, they were the price of his power, the fine print on a deal he never got to read. And in that, he becomes something far more haunting than a fallen hero. He's a cautionary whisper about the cost of greatness and the invisible strings even the strongest can't snap. Deep beneath the earth, where the air hums with the memory of ancient fires, the Hopi people trace their origins not to a single act of creation, but to a harrowing journey through multiple worlds, each one a test of resilience and collective will. According to their emergence myth, humanity began in the first world, a place of pure harmony, but corruption and imbalance forced them to seek refuge in the second world through a hollow reed. When that too collapsed under the weight of human folly, they climbed higher, repeating this cycle of ascent and purification until they reached the fourth world, our present reality. But this wasn't just a physical migration, it was a spiritual evolution, each world refining the Hopi's understanding of their covenant with the divine. The layers of these underworlds are etched with symbolic meaning. The third world, called Kuskaza, is described as a place of towering cities and advanced technology, sounding eerily like our own modern era before greed and war drowned it in a great flood. Survivors, guided by the ant people's spiritual protectors who taught them humility and survival, escaped to the surface through a sipapu, a sacred portal often depicted as a small hole in the floor of Hopi kivas. This cyclical view of history where civilizations rise, fall, and are reborn mirrors prophecies found in other indigenous traditions, from the Maya's 5 suns to Hinduism's yugas. Yet the Hopi's version carries a unique urgency. Their emergent story isn't just about the past, it's a blueprint for navigating the future. Central to this narrative is the prophecy of Pahana, the lost white brother. Unlike colonial myths of benevolent saviors, Pahana isn't a conqueror or missionary. He's a sibling who strayed from the Hopi's original instructions. According to tradition, when the Hopi emerged into the fourth world, Pahana departed eastward carrying a fragment of a sacred tablet. His eventual return, marked by the reuniting of the tablet's pieces, will signal a time of reckoning and renewal. Some interpret this as an allegory for reconciling indigenous and settler worldviews, while others see it as a warning about the dangers of materialism and environmental neglect. The late Hopi elder Thomas Baniasia famously cautioned that Pahana's return might not be peaceful. It could come only after the modern world's excesses trigger cataclysmic purification, much like the floods that destroyed earlier worlds. Modern parallels are impossible to ignore. The Hopi's 9 prophecies, shared with the United Nations in 1992, foretold a time of climate chaos, societal collapse, and wars over resources, conditions many argue we're witnessing today. But the prophecies also hold a key to survival: the Hopi's timeless practices of sustainability, community, and reverence for nature. Their emergence myth, then, isn't just a story. It's a call to realign with the principles that allowed them to endure where other worlds failed. As we face our own potential tipping points, the Hopi's journey through the underworlds whispers a question. Will we heed the lessons of the Sipapu, or will our fourth world become just another layer in the archaeological record of human folly? Deep in the forests of Slavic folklore, where shadows whisper secrets older than the trees themselves, lurks Koshchei the Deathless, a villain so cunning he cheated mortality itself. Unlike typical monsters who fall to sword or fire, Koshchei's essence isn't tucked away in his shriveled body. It's hidden inside a needle, nestled within an egg, locked in a duck, trapped in a hare, and buried under the roots of the mightiest oak. To defeat him, a hero must unravel this Russian nesting doll of a curse, each layer more absurd than the last. But beneath the fairy tale whimsy lies a chilling metaphor: the fragility of evil. Koshchei isn't invincible because he's strong. He's vulnerable because his power depends on something small, hidden, and easily crushed. The egg motif pulses with cosmic symbolism. In Slavic creation myths, the universe hatched from a primordial egg, its yolk becoming the sun, its shell the sky. Koshchei's soul egg inverts this. Rather than containing life, it harbors death's antithesis, a perversion of the natural order. His immortality isn't divine, it's stolen, hoarded like a dragon's treasure. The sequence of objects guarding it, needle, egg, duck, hare, oak, mirrors the stages of a ritual, each element representing barriers between the human world and the supernatural. To reach his soul, one must think like a mythmaker, decoding symbols as much as breaking spells. But what happens when this tale is flipped? Modern storytellers, particularly feminist authors, have seized Koshchei's trope and turned it inside out. In Ekaterina Sedia's The Secret History of Moscow, Koshchei becomes a tragic figure, his soul egg not a weakness but a prison, his cruelty the result of centuries of isolation. Meanwhile, Catherine Arden's The Bear and the Nightingale reimagines the egg as a metaphor for toxic masculinity's fragility. Its destruction not a heroic act but a liberation for those he's enslaved. These retellings expose the original myth's unspoken truth. Koshchei's deathlessness isn't power, it's stagnation. His soul isn't hidden away for protection, it's trapped, unable to grow or change. Even the act of hiding one's soul externally speaks volumes. In Slavic folk magic, the duck soul could wander during sleep or trauma, requiring protective charms to anchor it. Koshchei takes this to an extreme, severing his soul entirely from his body, becoming a hollow shell driven by hunger and control. Feminist revisions highlight this disconnect. His inability to love or empathize isn't strength but a grotesque disability. When Vasilisa the Wise, a recurring heroine in retellings, outwits him, she doesn't just break the egg. She exposes the absurdity of a life spent fearing vulnerability. The oak tree guarding Koshchei's soul adds another layer. Sacred to Perun, god of thunder, oaks symbolized endurance and connection between earth and sky. Burying his soul beneath one suggests a parasitic relationship. Koshchei leeches off the divine while contributing nothing. Contemporary interpretations, like Catherine Valent's Deathless, frame this as commentary on patriarchal systems. Structures that appear ancient and unshakable are often propped up by fragile, hidden mechanisms. Destroy the egg and the whole edifice crumbles. Perhaps the most radical twist comes from oral traditions where Baba Yaga, usually a wild card, helps heroes find Koshchei's soul. In these tales, the witch isn't a villain but a guide, her allegiance to chaos outweighing any loyalty to deathless tyrants. She represents the untamed knowledge needed to dismantle systems of oppression, her chicken-legged hut spinning like a compass needle toward truth. Modern retellings amplify this, positioning her as Koshchei's foil. Where he hoards, she redistributes. Where he fears death, she dances with it. Koshchei's myth endures because it's a mirror. The original warns against the corrupting nature of stolen immortality, while feminist revisions ask, who benefits when we equate invulnerability with power? The answer lies in that fragile egg, not in its destruction, but in the realization that some souls, once hidden, forget how to live. Long before Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha, he walked the earth in countless other forms. A king, a hare, a merchant, even a tree spirit, each life a thread in the tapestry of his enlightenment. These past lives chronicled in the Jataka tales aren't just charming fables, they're karmic blueprints showing how every selfless act and selfish mistake rippled across lifetimes to shape his final breakthrough. Take the story of the Monkey King who stretched his body across a ravine as a bridge for his tribe, only to collapse under their weight. As he lay dying, he smiled, knowing his sacrifice ensured their survival. This tale isn't merely about heroism, it's a masterclass in the bodhisattva ideal, where compassion defies even the instinct for self-preservation. What makes the Jatakas extraordinary is their granularity. Unlike grand cosmic myths, they zoom in on mundane moments where karmic seeds are planted. A merchant overcharging for grain, a prince refusing to hunt, a parrot stubbornly guarding a fruit tree during a drought. In one lesser-known story, Siddhartha is reborn as a courtesan's son who, witnessing his mother's loneliness beneath her glittering facade, sells his inheritance to free her debts. The twist, his mother, ashamed of his pity, rejects him, teaching that even well-intentioned acts can bind others to suffering if they rob them of dignity. The mechanics of rebirth in these tales defy Hollywood notions of destiny. Karma isn't a scoreboard but a labyrinth of cause and effect. In the Vesantara Jataka, Siddhartha's penultimate life, he gives away his kingdom, children, and wife to prove his detachment. Later traditions would critique this as extreme, revealing Buddhism's own evolution. That enlightenment isn't about abandoning worldly ties but seeing through their illusions. Modern psychology echoes these themes. The Jatakas focus on pattern-breaking mirrors. Cognitive behavioral therapies work to disrupt harmful cycles. When the future Buddha, as a buffalo, endures a monkey's abuse without retaliation, then asks, "Does anger serve you?" It's a primal example of breaking conditioned responses. These stories endure because they're not about perfection but progression. A single Jataka might show Siddhartha failing as a jealous gardener in one life, then overcoming envy as a generous elephant in the next. The message is achingly human. Awakening isn't a lightning bolt but the slow unwinding of habits, life by life, choice by choice. In a dimly lit 16th century laboratory, where the scent of mercury and sulfur clung to the air like a spectre, the Swiss alchemist Paracelsus scribbled a recipe that would blur the line between science and sacrilege. His formula for the homunculus, a tiny, artificial human, wasn't just fantastical speculation. It was a step-by-step guide calling for human semen, horse dung, and a 40-day incubation in a sealed flask, heated by the gentle decay of manure. To modern ears, it sounds like grotesque fiction, but to Paracelsus, this was serious proto-science. He believed the homunculus would emerge fully formed, gifted with secret knowledge and bound to its creator's will. This wasn't just alchemy, it was the prelude to biotechnology. The echoes of Paracelsus's experiment ripple through literature's most famous reanimation tale, Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's Victor Frankenstein, though working with electricity rather than alchemy, shares the same hubris, the belief that life can be engineered, controlled. But where Paracelsus saw a servant of arcane wisdom, Shelley foresaw a monster. The homunculus and Frankenstein's creature both rebel against their makers, exposing the same chilling truth. Playing God doesn't just risk failure, it risks creating something beyond your control. Fast forward to modern labs, where the homunculus has shape shifted into new forms. Cloning, whether Dolly the sheep or CRISPR-edited embryos, forces us to confront Paracelsus's old questions with terrifying urgency. Can artificial life ever be truly mastered? The ethical dilemmas are eerily similar. Just as Paracelsus imagined his homunculus possessing unnatural insight, today's genetic engineers debate whether edited humans might inherit unintended traits, not just physical but cognitive, even existential. And like Frankenstein's creature, cloned beings could face societal rejection, becoming outcasts through no fault of their own. Yet there's a crucial difference. Paracelsus's homunculus was meant to serve. Modern bioethics flips that script, asking, if we engineer life, don't we owe it dignity? The alchemist's flask has been replaced by Petri dishes and gene drives, but the core fear remains that in our quest to create, we might forget how to care. The homunculus, once a curio of Renaissance magic, now stands as a mirror to our own ambitions, whispering across centuries that some recipes, no matter how precise, leave no room for the soul. Water rises in every corner of the ancient world, not just as rain, but as divine retribution, washing away civilizations like sandcastles before the tide. The biblical Noah builds an ark to weather 40 days of unrelenting storms. Hindu texts speak of Manu, the lone survivor, rescued by a fish that later grows into a giant vessel to outlast the flood. Greek legends tell of Deucalion and Pyrrha, repopulating the earth by tossing stones over their shoulders that spring up as new generations. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh, older than Genesis by centuries, describes Utnapishtim receiving cryptic warnings from the gods to dismantle his house and build a boat before the waters swallow mankind. These stories span continents, cultures, and millennia, yet their structure remains eerily identical: a world corrupted, a chosen survivor, and a deluge that resets history. The question isn't whether these myths are connected, it's why they echo so persistently in the human psyche. One compelling theory points to shared geological trauma. Around 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea transformed catastrophically when rising Mediterranean waters burst through the Bosporus, flooding fertile plains and displacing ancient communities. Survivors would have carried this horror inland, weaving it into oral traditions that spread like ripples across generations. Similarly, meltwater pulses at the end of the last ice age could have spawned localized floods so devastating they imprinted on collective memory. But geology alone doesn't explain the moral undercurrents. Unlike earthquakes or wildfires, flood myths almost universally frame the disaster as punishment, divine bleach scrubbing away humanity's sins. Dig deeper and cultural distinctions emerge. The Babylonian epic of Atrahasis, a precursor to Gilgamesh's flood, frames the deluge as noise pollution. The gods drown humanity because their clamor interrupts celestial sleep. Compare this to Genesis, where violence and corruption trigger Yahweh's remorse. The Aztec version, recorded in the Codex Chimalpopoca, describes a world already destroyed 4 times by jaguars, wind, fire, and finally water, each apocalypse refining humanity like metal in a forge. These variations reveal how each culture processed the archetype through its own values. For the Babylonians, order trumped chaos; for the Hebrews, moral purity; for the Aztecs, cyclical renewal. Yet the most haunting parallel lies in the survivors' arcs. Post-flood, Noah plants a vineyard and falls into drunken shame. Manu's first act is a sacrifice so potent it births a goddess from the offerings. Deucalion and Pyrrha, devoid of divine instructions, rely on raw intuition to rebuild. Each story grapples with the same existential weight: surviving isn't the same as living. The flood doesn't just cleanse, it isolates, forcing those left behind to redefine purpose in an empty world. Modern science adds a chilling layer. Core samples from Mesopotamia show sediment layers consistent with catastrophic flooding around 2900 BC. Indigenous Australian tales describe coastlines swallowed by rising seas, events confirmed by archaeologists dating submerged Aboriginal sites. These aren't coincidences, they're proof that flood myths encode real cataclysms, distilled through generations into cautionary parables. Perhaps that's why the deluge archetype endures. It isn't just about water, it's about accountability. In an age of climate crisis where melting ice caps and superstorms blur the line between myth and forecast, these ancient stories take on new urgency. They whisper a warning we've heard before but never quite heeded, that civilizations, no matter how mighty, are only ever one rising tide away from starting over. From the labyrinthine prophecies of Delphi to the unbreakable threads of the Norns, these myths expose something raw and deeply human, our fear of being powerless in a universe that seems to move without our consent. Whether it's the Aztecs desperately feeding the sun to stave off eternal night, or Oedipus unknowingly fulfilling a curse he spent his life fleeing, every culture grapples with the same tension. How much of our fate is written and how much can we rewrite? What's fascinating isn't just the diversity of these stories, it's their shared undercurrent of defiance. Even in tales where destiny seems absolute, heroes and mortals alike push back. The Monkey King battles heaven itself for autonomy. The Norse charge toward Ragnarök with laughter, not surrender. The Hopi climb through worlds, refusing to accept collapse as the final word. These aren't just escapist fantasies, they're cultural coping mechanisms, ways to scream into the void that we matter, even when the cosmos seems indifferent. But here's the twist, these myths also offer a sly critique of control. The Jade Emperor's ledgers and the Moirai's threads remind us that absolute freedom might be an illusion, but so is the idea of total predestination. The very act of telling these stories, of wrestling with the unknown, is its own kind of agency. Maybe that's why they endure, not because they give us answers, but because they let us live in the question. Now we want to hear from you. What myths of destiny and defiance live in your cultural roots? Share them in the comments, and who knows, if the threads align, maybe we'll spin this conversation forward into modern times, where algorithms feel like digital fates and climate change looms like a global fimbulwinter. Until then, remember, whether you see destiny as a path, a tapestry, or a game of celestial chess, the most radical act might be simply choosing how